the laziest Kryptonian in the Marvel Universe. Greetings, fellow multiversal adventurers. It's an honor to have you back in this saga that has us all hooked. Official channel statement: this story is 100% epic fiction, so please don't attempt real magic. The results aren't guaranteed and insurance won't cover it. The rights to this masterpiece belong entirely to its brilliant original author. We are just a barge sharing it with you. Do you want to keep being part of this amazing community? Join our ninja army of subscribers on YouTube and give this content a like. And for true fans, our Patreon has exclusive ninjutsu waiting for you. Chapter 51: Unsuccessful Invitation. The car explosion was actually quite minor, which isn't surprising. If there had been too much explosives, causing the car's steel plates to literally fly everywhere, it would have become a true car bomb. So the explosives were merely a visual effect. The explosion of the flame mechanism was what truly completed the scene. And the scene where the flames caught on the male protagonist's trouser leg and the man reached out to slap it was truly an unplanned shot. However, the director had already decided that, for the sake of authenticity, he would definitely include the scene in the feature film. Even if there were minor flaws, even if a stunt double showed up, it wouldn't matter. That's how Hollywood works. As long as the bloopers are quickly resolved, they're not a big deal. Besides, this wasn't a close-up of the male protagonist, a long-shot blooper. Didn't everyone's eyes be so sharp as to tell it was a different person? Regardless, the shot worked. As long as the cinematographer didn't make any mistakes and captured the scene correctly, the director believed he would be immortalized for the film's climactic explosion. Of course, this is every creator's confidence. Whether that actually happened in the end, though, was hard to say. Anyway, by now, he was so excited he was talking nonsense and dancing with joy, hugging the producer. After filming this scene, Henry immediately returned to his role as a bystander. He changed out of his main character's costume and this time played the role of a bystander fleeing the street after the car exploded. This unskilled performance, as long as the actors didn't laugh and didn't make mistakes in their positioning, causing them to bump into each other, was a one-shot success. After filming a few street scenes, the crew behind the scenes frantically began cleaning up the location, restoring the street to its original state. If the city government's restoration review failed, the fine would be hefty. Although it wasn't even noon yet, the bystander crew's work for the day was already over. The afternoon shoot was all about the main and supporting actors, with no scenes for the bystanders. Since it was less than a day's work, they were only paid half a day's salary. Among the bystanders, Henry stood out because he had an extra stunt shot, earning him a bit more than the others. The pay for that sequence was a whopping 800 taels of silver, equivalent to 5 or 6 days' work for an average casual actor. But no one envied him, as everyone had witnessed the filming process and realized the money wasn't so easy to come by. Especially since the actors' feet were burned by the end, and since they weren't wearing fireproof suits, they might have even gotten burns under their pants. Everyone came with a dream of stardom. While some earned more, the backstage crew had nothing to envy. After the casual actors dispersed, Henry couldn't escape, so Channing kept him. They found a coffee shop, and it was clear the action team leader was quite pleased with the action sequence. After buying himself and the young man a cheap coffee, Channing got straight to the point. "Young man, you did a great job. Are you interested in joining me? It's not just stunt work, I have many other ways to make money." Henry didn't rush to agree. In his past life, he'd seen enough of the ugly capitalists to become immune to their soft and hard-put tactics. Channing's invitation was straightforward, without any sense of pressure. In fact, even if forced, Henry didn't want to be with his team because their skills were so poor. He didn't even need to think about the reason for his refusal. Henry said, "Channing, thank you for talking to me. But honestly, I still want to be an actor who appears on screen. Stuntmen are just behind the scenes, so they don't hold much appeal to me. Will you really not consider it? You're very talented, and you'll make more money than a sideline actor." Channing thought for a moment, then added, "Besides, there are stuntmen who have made it and become big stars. You still have a chance." "Oh, come on. Are you talking about Buster Keaton or Harry Houdini? Don't you think about the era they lived in? Or Jack Chan? He's from Hong Kong," Channing said with regret. "What a shame. You're talented and young, and this is the time to strive. Without this time to accumulate experience, the chance to become a big star wouldn't have fallen to you." But Channing, the division of labor in Hollywood is becoming increasingly specialized. If I'm typecast, Will I have a chance to move on from being a stuntman? Besides, what can I earn in the end, except for injuries? There's not even an Oscar for stuntmen. These simple words left Channing speechless. Because Henry was telling the truth. Even though stuntmen earn more than regular actors, that's all for their medical expenses. If you want to be rich, you have to be a star. Ordinary third-tier actors might even have to pay their entire fortunes for a chance to appear on screen. Channing was like being poured with a bucket of cold water. He was completely limp, and it was hard to persuade him. Seeing this, Henry knew he had given her too much. Don't knock someone down so hard that life becomes boring and they seek escape in tall buildings. After a moment's thought, Henry smiled and said, Channing, this way of working together is actually quite good. You have people to lead, so it's impossible for you to give all the opportunities to me. If you're truly short-staffed, or if there's a particularly good opportunity, please contact me. I'll continue to pursue my dream of becoming a star and look for opportunities in Hollywood. Is that okay? If he hadn't agreed to join the other team directly, if he could still come up with it, it would probably be a troublesome job like today's. But if it really didn't work out, he could just refuse it later. Henry's words today were merely a way to help both sides get out of this situation, not to create animosity. Having regained his composure, Jin-Ying thought carefully and decided that this approach wasn't a big deal. Or perhaps, it was simply their way of doing things. Jin-Ying wasn't the owner of a legitimate agency or team, he merely had the qualifications to register as an agent. There weren't many stuntmen with formal management contracts. An action team was a group of people they knew and had good relationships with. Once he got the opportunity, he would assemble the necessary behind-the-scenes staff according to the producer's requirements. There weren't any fixed members. At best, they were people he worked with frequently. If these people already had other work, they would naturally prioritize those jobs. When selecting actors, the producer's needs came first, followed by their own staff. If they couldn't find enough, they would find suitable stuntmen from outside. Henry's answer wasn't a complete rejection. Would he refuse if the other party didn't have work? It's just that when I'm arranging people, Channing tends to approach Henry later in the process. Maintaining this kind of relationship is enough. After thinking it through, Channing stopped insisting and said, Okay, we'll get in touch if you need anything. I hope we can work together again in the future. Yes, Henry said politely. My new book has been signed. Please read it, bookmark it, and recommend it. Thank you. Chapter 52 Special BBS. Have you heard of that special BBS? Which university built it? Not any known university, nor was it created by some big-name lab executive. So what's so special about this BBS? Once you connect, you only have 10 minutes to prove yourself. Once you're connected, your computer will be compromised, and a virus will immediately paralyze the entire system. I heard a certain professor got infected, so? What's so great about it? It's just a poison pot at best. You're infected the moment you connect. What kind of virus would wait 10 minutes for it to launch? Either it executes, or nothing happens. That's normal, okay? Don't be so ignorant that you'd think computer viruses spread like syringes. Okay, let's not talk about viruses. I still have the same question. What's so special about that BBS that's worth the risk of connecting for 10 minutes? After connecting to that BBS, there's no introduction, just 3 messages. The first one says, whoever reads this, you only have 10 minutes to protect yourself and gain the right to stay. Otherwise, you'll have no choice but to leave. The person who left the message is CK. Oh, and what about the second message? There's nothing here, don't be fooled. The person who left the message is KM. KM? Could he be the legendary guy? And what about the third message? That guy above is shit. This is the biggest treasure. The person who left the message is Lieutenant Fuck. If the last 2 people are who I think they are, then who is CK? I don't know. That's why everyone wants to risk a 10-minute system crash to find the secrets of that BBS. Messages like this were quietly circulating in universities across the United States. The rise of the personal computer was an irreversible trend, and a considerable number of people were not content to be mere users, but were constantly pushing the limits of this emerging technology. Just like the advent of the automobile, which also gave rise to speed racing, racing also emerged. Seeking limits, and then pushing them, is like human instinct. But to put it bluntly, it's simply a search for thrill in the act of committing suicide, much like those who play extreme sports. The difference is that extreme sports pursue the pinnacle of physical endurance, while this one tests the limits of intelligence. Therefore, This unique BBS quickly spread among these reckless university students. This was especially true at top universities specializing in science and engineering. Not only were the self-important students, but even professors in computer science departments were also drawn in. However, most people were still clueless after 10 minutes. They could only watch helplessly as their computers were hacked, their system files wiped, and a terrifying clown.matrix image appeared on the screen, laughing. If the computer had a sound card and speakers plugged in, an eerie MIDI laugh could be heard. Naturally, this rumor also reached a leisurely doctoral student at the Institute of Astrophysics at Caltech. He enrolled in MIT's electrical engineering program at 14 and eventually earned a doctorate in engineering physics. His interest in Caltech stemmed less from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which collaborated with NASA, and more from Hollywood actresses. He simply came to Caltech to get a degree. While his MIT alumni weren't entirely out of place at this prestigious institution, they were also viewed as a thorn in the side of many. Perhaps the reason for this thorn wasn't his university background, but rather his upbringing and the women who surrounded him. Tony Stark, the sole heir to Stark Industries, strolled through this sunny campus. His handsome face instantly captured the attention of many women, and he was also met with envious and resentful glances from the men. Of course, those nagging glances didn't bother Tony Stark at all. Whether they were admirers or envious, their admission to this university proved they had the wits to avoid antagonizing the eldest son of the Stark family. Even a single look of disdain had a repercussion too heavy for them to bear. Money equals power. This is an unwavering equation in America. Anyone who finds this equation inaccurate simply lacks sufficient funds. In a place like this, only two things could capture young Master Stark's attention. One was a beauty that captivated his heart, even if that excitement only lasted until the time of the sage, at least it had managed to keep him afloat. The other was the unknown that intrigued him. Perhaps it was knowledge, or something he had never seen before. So, when he overheard the conversation between two sleazy guys in the common dining area, he became intrigued by that special BBS. After devouring a burger from the school cafeteria and abandoning any thoughts of hiring a chef to replace the school cafeteria's cook, Tony Stark plopped himself down next to the two slovenly students no one wanted to approach. He started by asking, "What's the IP address of that BBS, are you?" Tony Stark, "Yes, I am. I don't sign autographs. I just want to know the IP address of the BBS you mentioned. Or is that something you can't reveal, and I have to find it myself?" "No, sir, of course not." The college student being questioned frantically searched his body. "I'll find a piece of paper and write it down for you. I should have some notepaper with me." No, just tell me. I can remember it. If you copy it down on something for me, I might lose it the next moment." Tony spoke the hurtful truth. "Oh, okay." The person who spoke directly reported an IP address. For those of them who work in the information industry, this kind of information is memorized directly in their heads. No one would write it down on paper. This is because important and frequently used things are naturally remembered, while things that are forgotten are not important at all, and forgetting them is not a big deal. After receiving a string of numbers, Tony Stark didn't say thank you, but just knocked his fist on the table twice, without even looking at the two people, and stood up and left. Seeing that the people had gone away, the two people who were sitting in their original seats looked at each other. One of them said, "Do you think it is possible for me to apply for Stark Industries in the future? For such things, you should ask directly when the person is present, and then sign a contract in black and white." Everyone knows that what the guy said on the spot may not be remembered the next time, let alone something like this that was not said. Alice, a good opportunity was missed. The two looked at each other and sighed. For them who came from ordinary families and were admitted to Caltech, it was impossible to be jealous of that person. Because they knew that they didn't even have the qualifications to be jealous. But it didn't mean that they didn't want to hold on to this golden thigh. It's just that when the opportunity came, they seemed unable to grasp it. The new book has been signed. Please read, collect and recommend it. Thank you. Chapter 53, Clown Virus. Leaving the common dining area, Tony Stark headed for the library's public computer area. The Starks' villa on Malibu Beach certainly had computers available, with superior performance and configuration. But it was a long way from the university, so it was better to use the public computers on campus. Personal computers were still an expensive luxury back then, and few college students, burdened by tuition loans, could afford them. However, This emerging technology was bound to play a crucial role in the foreseeable future. Given Caltech's vision, it was bound to devote all its efforts to cultivating talent in this field. The first step, then, was to introduce computers to more students. The gaming and computing convenience of computers naturally attracted countless college students. Therefore, the library's public computer area was often full, and sometimes there was a line. The Stark family's eldest son certainly couldn't wait in line, eagerly waiting for others to finish using their computers. Tony simply found a computer seat that suited his taste and headed over. He patted the shoulder of a chubby man chatting and surfing the BBS, then flung out 100 taels of silver and winked. The chubby man, about to turn and curse, first saw the green bills, then the person giving him the wink. He immediately gave a fawning smile and logged out, standing up. He didn't forget to pat the chair to cool the heat a little. During this period, Tony Stark hadn't yet developed the obsessive-compulsive personality and eccentricities that would come after he became the leader of the group. Perhaps it was more accurate to say that Tony's perceived eccentricities were forced upon him by the ill-intentioned people around him. At that time, he was simply a student, from a wealthy family, generous, and playful. Anyone who truly understood the joys of fun knows that those who put their heart into it usually have no obsessions or taboos. It could be said that the fun lies in breaking down conventional norms, getting dirty, and messing with others. So, not only was Tony Stark without bodyguards, he looked rather slovenly and unconcerned, with a touch of hipster flair. He didn't even think twice about slumping down on the chair someone else had sat on. The fat man, after getting the money, didn't just leave. He stepped behind the campus celebrity, wanting to see what this man, whose family assets could buy hundreds of computers, was going to do. The fat man's eyes lit up when he saw Tony Stark using a terminal interface to log into a certain set of IP addresses. He recognized that set of IP addresses, and because of that, he had crashed his family's computer. Before finding someone to reinstall the system, he had to use the public computers in the school library to surf the internet to relieve his boredom. When he saw the bulletin board page that impressed him so much, the fat man immediately clapped his hands and exclaimed, "Wow, everyone, look, someone's going to challenge the Joker again." As soon as he finished speaking, curious people gathered and started talking. Tony Stark didn't chase him away. He took a moment to turn and look at the fat man, asking, "Does this BBS have a name?" "No, it doesn't, sir. This BBS doesn't have a name. It's just that in 10 minutes, the entire screen will be overrun by the Joker virus, so we call it that. But don't you pay attention to the time? You only have 10 minutes, that's plenty." Tony quickly typed commands into the command prompt. In that era, DOS-based personal computers didn't have the concept of multitasking or multiple operating systems. Whatever program was running on the screen, that was the only program that could be used. The first randomly entered review command wasn't expected to be useful. Tony simply wanted to check the system's error message to determine the underlying system. After all, error messages vary from one system to another, and there's no standard one. This made it easier to identify. Tony immediately recognized that this was the Unix environment used by older mainframe computers. He immediately turned to looking up the version number and the BBS's architecture to determine his method of intrusion. After obtaining all the necessary information, Tony concluded that this BBS didn't require any other hacking programs. Since there were no restrictions on command input, he could directly perform tasks beyond the specified input instructions. Meanwhile, the fat man, who had given up his seat, called out to the gathered crowd, saying, "Place your bets. Place your bets. Will a genius from MIT become the fourth poster on the BBS, or will we see the clown?" Suddenly, the public computer area, which should have been silent, with only the sound of keyboard tapping, became abuzz with activity. There were even many empty slots, as most people gathered behind Tony Stark to watch the action. This scene even alarmed the library staff. As soon as they heard someone trying to log into the clown BBS, they rushed to stop them, regardless of whether the person was a genius or the son of a wealthy family. Of course, the library staff were kept at the outer edge by other busybodies, unable to prevent the Stark son from showing off his prowess, or rather, making a fool of himself. Tony's typing was swift, even though he hadn't experienced the hardships of being single. His fingers were as nimble as the finest pianists, but the sound they produced was neither melodious nor pleasant. After a moment, the BBS message page cleared, and the screen returned to command input mode. He activated a file editing mode and began writing hacking code to quickly gain access to the BBS system. Concentrated on the screen, Tony didn't notice the constant whispers behind him. Will he notice? He hasn't noticed yet. No one can figure it out the first time. When the screen returned to the BBS message page, in addition to the 3 existing messages, Tony Stark left a 4th. This little trick is nothing to be proud of. Then he clapped his hands, raised his hands flat at his sides, and stood up, as if to greet the crowd's cheers. However, the young master's performance failed to gain sympathy. Instead, everyone stared at the screen, holding their breath. Suddenly, the screen changed. A dot-patterned clown's smiling face filled the entire screen. The screen kept refreshing from top to bottom, indicating that the system was not frozen, but running. The moment the Joker's smiling face appeared, everyone really cheered. Wow, the results are in. The Joker conquered Stark. Tony looked back at the screen in disbelief and slammed the keyboard. As expected, the keyboard did not respond. And amid the cheers, there was still a hint of dissent. The library manager squatted down, holding his head, and cursed, "Fuck you, Tony Stark, I have to redo the system again. Do you know how troublesome it is to redo the system with a management program on a public computer? You are so rich, why don't you go home and fix your own computer? Why are you trying to hurt me?" The young master, who had not experienced much, was naturally embarrassed at this time. The new book has been signed. Please read, collect, and recommend it. Thank you. Chapter 54 The Guy Who Thinks He's His Enemy. Tony Stark's embarrassing display was quickly forgotten by the heartless man. After signing 2 checks, donating them to the school library and the poor soul who was responsible for the cleanup, he left without looking back. Even if he wanted to deal with the Joker virus, he would do it slowly after returning home. He wasn't used to the keyboard here. Besides, he wanted to delve deeper into CK's stuff, which would take time. Now, Tony Stark and a group of computer guys were sitting in the lounge, discussing what had just happened. "Are you saying I just hacked into a fake host?" Tony said incredulously. "Well, that's the most likely conclusion I reached after discussing it with the others. And you were going in the wrong direction from the beginning. Where was I wrong?" the arrogant young master said stubbornly. "CK's first tip was to protect yourself, not hack him." Tony wanted to argue that if he could successfully hack into the other party and stop the possible timer program, wouldn't he be able to interrupt the infection? However, since they'd used a fake hosting space to deceive people, Tony naturally didn't find any virus-related programs, and thus couldn't prevent anything from happening. So, his own computer was also infected. "Has anyone found out where the BBS is located?" Tony asked. "If you can't solve the problem online, arrange a real-person fight offline. That's the eternal truth. I checked, and that IP address belongs to the University of Chicago on the East Coast. But the people in Chicago investigated and found that none of the computer room staff had set up the BBS, and even the server didn't have the service." Walt, in the early days of hacking, the main battle was still between viruses and antivirus software. Many network intrusion and misdirection techniques that would become commonplace in later generations were groundbreaking back then. So it wasn't that Tony Stark was less skilled or less intelligent, but rather that he hadn't expected anyone to do such a thing. In the computer community, he could probably guess who KM and LT were. Even if they hadn't shown their faces, they'd likely seen them on other BBSs. LT himself was even in the academic world. But this nickname, CK, was something he'd never seen before. So, Tony Stark also asked the question everyone wanted to ask. Who is CK? He can't be the guy who sells Calvin Klein underwear, right? Everyone wants to know, but no one knows. At least no one has admitted to being CK elsewhere yet. Unbeknownst to everyone, the initiator of the Joker BBS had finished filming that morning, had lunch, and then rushed to the Caltech library that afternoon to checking into the bookcase section. Henry overheard what happened in the public computer area, but paid it no mind. He was poring over the academic literature and internal journals of this top science university, the unpublished portions. Papers like these, which weren't published in prestigious journals, were of varying quality. Some were creative, but lacked depth, while others were clearly perfunctory. However, while Tony Stark was in the lounge trying to gather more information about the Joker BBS, he received an unexpected guest, Justin Hammer, a Monegasque international student. It turned out that not everyone was afraid to offend Tony Stark, preoccupied with currying favor with the young Stark and securing a job at Stark Industries. was still daring enough to target this seemingly undisputed figure, seeking only trouble. Justin Hammer, surrounded by a group of people, chased away the computer geeks and took the seat next to Tony Stark. A group of poor computer geeks, of course, wouldn't dare mess with the wealthy youngsters led by Hammer. Tony Stark wouldn't be the patron, so they all hurriedly stood up and offered their seats. Justin, sitting directly across from Tony, crossed his legs and said, "I heard you were mocked by the Joker. Is this still our Stark genius? I feel bad for your father." Clearly, Justin knew how to piss this man off. Tony said angrily, "Shut your stinky mouth. Since it's already full of shit, don't open your mouth to disgust others." What? A fool who calls himself a genius failed, and you don't allow others to talk about it? Do you have to put on the king's new clothes and let everyone cooperate with you to deceive themselves? Oh, Tony is great. Come on, Tony. Fuck, I dare to accept the result of failure. What about you? Do you want others to write a strategy and then ask you to copy it? But you copy it without using your brain, thinking that if you write A as B, the thing is yours. Is that true? Our genius Mr. Hammer, so what? I am good at finding problems that others have not found, and then making corrections. As long as the result is good, then I am right to do so. You are just jealous of my success, huh? Your success? Have you ever succeeded? Give me an example. After all, I am ignorant and don't know what you have done successfully, huh? Justin laughed back with an even louder laugh. Hammer flung a piece of paper onto the table and said, "The Challenger space shuttle, originally scheduled to depart on July 22, 1985, was delayed and ultimately failed. But according to my calculations, NASA gave an incorrect number for the planned atmospheric entry point for the return trip. This means that even if the shuttle launched successfully, they might not have returned. My numbers are correct." Tony Stark glanced at it and said disdainfully, "NASA's numbers are indeed wrong, but yours are also wrong. Are you sure you two need to laugh at each other, or did I make a mistake? Tell me," Justin Hammer shouted, unwilling to give up. Anyone with a brain can answer such a simple question. "Oh, sorry, did I reveal your stupidity? You're not going to sue me for leaking secrets, are you? Fuck. Can anyone just solve this problem?" Justin Hammer angrily snapped his fingers at the people passing by and said, "Hey, you, that's you, come here. Can you solve this problem? Calculate the data for the return entry point of the space shuttle." The man who was stopped and looked confused was the Kryptonian Henry, who heard the sound of his own telephone recorder and was about to leave the library. Of course, he didn't know the group of people in front of him, and he didn't pay attention before. He was just called down and a question was thrown in his face. He wanted to turn around and leave, but Henry, in the idea of helping others for happiness, reported a third number that was different from the two answers on the paper. The number Henry reported was very close to the first number. Tony Stark immediately said, "This guy is right, because it's the same answer as mine. The new book has been signed. Please read, collect and recommend it. Thank you." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 55: The Reason for Leaving. Justin Hammer was furious when a passerby and Tony Stark taunted him. Pointing at the passerby, he said, "What do you know? You believe a random number you just said," Henry retorted. "The first number is clearly from an old IBM mainframe calculator. It's due to the inherent error in floating point arithmetic, an old problem. The second number doesn't account for the lunar gravitational pull. Although the moon doesn't appear explicitly in the question, you've given a specific date, confirming its position. Unless you're orbiting Earth and accelerating into the atmosphere today, you can ignore the moon's tiny effect. But landing requires deceleration, not acceleration. Therefore, the answer to the question must account for the lunar gravitational pull, especially if the entry point is on the same side as the moon. By the way, since you're asking me this question, aren't you a member of NASA's Apollo program? If so, I'd be concerned about whether the astronauts would ever be able to return to Earth." Tony slammed his hands on the table and laughed. Justin slammed his hands on the table as well, but he stood up and glared at the man before him. He gritted his teeth and said, "How dare you? Such a simple question. Anyone with a brain can tell the answer just by looking. Are you saying the correct answer is wrong? Could it be?" Oh, sorry, I was rude. I should have been more patient with people with disabilities. Henry changed his originally sarcastic expression into a sincere and compassionate smile, comforting the man in front of him who was about to have a brain hemorrhage. Fuck. Justin Hammer jumped up and pointed at the passerby's nose and threatened, "Do you believe I will get someone to fire you? Do you know who I am?" "Of course I don't know who you are. You don't have a name tag. I even more doubt you have the guts to fire me." Henry threw a wad of money on the table. "How about we make a bet that you can't fire me? I don't want to win too much from you, just one win will be enough." Justin Hammer immediately took out a banknote from his pocket, and without caring about the denomination, he flicked it on the table with a very disdainful gesture. He said, "If you have the guts, tell me your student status. I guarantee that you will not be a student here tomorrow." Henry was quick-eyed and quick-handed. He snatched all the banknotes on the table and scolded with a smile, "Idiot, because I was not a student here in the first place. What are you going to expel?" Suddenly, Henry's face changed again, and he returned to that sympathetic expression. He pouted and said, "Oh, sorry, I was wrong again. I should have cared more about the mentally retarded people and shouldn't have scolded you. I apologize here. I absolutely do not mean to discriminate against people with disabilities." Fuck. Justin Hammer was so excited that he almost did a backflip. The group of young people who came with Hammer certainly couldn't just sit there and watch their boss make a fool of himself. One of them immediately shouted, "What school are you from? Believe it or not, we will revoke your student status tomorrow. It won't be any use getting a degree." Henry put on a slapping grin and said, "I still don't believe you can do it, because I haven't been to college at all. The only thing I have is a library card from the Los Angeles Municipal Library. It doesn't matter if you revoke it." Someone obviously didn't believe what the person in front of him said, and hesitantly said, "Who are you? How could you?" pointing to the space shuttle question on the table. Henry smiled and said, "This kind of knowledge is not for everyone with a brain. Don't envy me. You can't envy what you don't have. And how stupid would someone have to tell you who I am? You're just asking for trouble, idiot. Next time, remember, when you call someone out, don't." Henry snapped his fingers repeatedly, like you're calling a dog. "When you show respect to others, you'll earn it yourself. If you treat me like a dog, I'll treat you like dogs, too." With that, he waved his hand and walked away, smiling. As for Tony Stark, while he wasn't the center of attention, which was a bit strange for him, he felt a bit relieved after watching a good show, with its hilarious, almost unrelenting performance. Of course, he didn't care who the person who left was. Even though the person could see the answers to the questions on the paper at a glance, that level of knowledge wasn't enough for Tony Stark to look at differently. Tony admired Justin's expression of impotent fury. This playboy from Monaco was constantly causing trouble for him, and Tony had long been fed up with him. But Tony hadn't considered dealing with him, let alone provoking him. But every time Justin came up to him, there was no way he'd let him go without getting a cold shoulder. And today's beating was a relief, Tony Stark thought with satisfaction. Henry hadn't left casually, of course. Normally, when he was in the library, he wouldn't leave until lunchtime unless he had other plans. But this time was different. Although his family had an answering machine, as long as the caller left a message, important messages wouldn't be missed. But Henry still used his super hearing to monitor the phone. He just didn't rush home to answer it the moment it rang. This time, it was Marion, the Screen Actors Guild clerk who called him, and who often delivered coffee. She'd just delivered a cup this morning, and she'd called this afternoon, asking Henry to contact her as soon as possible. There was no time to stop reading. Freeloading on the library was just a way to pass the time. Since he had a serious call, Henry walked to the parking lot, drove his car, and headed for the Screen Actors Guild. Going home to answer the phone would be pure piss-off behavior. This wasn't lined for the future, I had to pretend to read it before I could take the next step. Henry still made his way to a relatively well-known vegetarian restaurant in Los Angeles and grabbed a salad to go. Small, inexpensive treats like coffee and salad were perfect for pleasing an adult woman who was very particular about her diet. Arriving at the Screen Actors Guild, it was just as ordinary as always. It wasn't particularly lively, but not so deserted that scumbags were everywhere. Marion was busy behind the counter, though it was unclear what she was busy with. Henry approached and said, "Hello, sweetheart. Did you eat well at lunch? I see you've lost weight from starvation." Marion looked up and said with a beaming smile, "Huh, Henry? Have I really lost weight? Here you go," she said, handing over the salad box. Henry said, "Take it as a late lunch or afternoon tea snack." "Oh, baby, you are so thoughtful," Marion said, holding her chest. Then she happily took the salad box. A woman like her would not accept just any coffee or salad. Henry happened to send her all the food from her favorite shops. Not too expensive, but also very delicious or drinkable. It belongs to Marion's pocket list. The new book has been signed. Please read, collect and recommend it. Thank you. Chapter 56 Audition Opportunity. However, Marion didn't eat immediately after accepting the salad box. That would be neither polite nor elegant. She pulled out a document and placed it in front of Henry. "Did you hear my message?" "Yes. The crew only had half a day of filming today. I went out for some exercise this afternoon, and when I came back I heard your message." Henry had to come up with an excuse for not answering the phone directly, so he made one up. At least exercising was more in line with the actor's persona. Running to the library was too strange. Just look at all those dyslexic celebrities and you'll see how many Hollywood actors are academically challenged. Marion stood up, pointed at the document, and explained, "If you go now, you should be able to catch up. This is a huge crew you can't find anywhere else. Under siege, with a production budget of $35 million. Although they're casting some passers-by, they have to go through auditions with a casting director and get the producer's approval. Although they had gathered a few people from several agencies, they were afraid they wouldn't have enough people, so they approached the Screen Actors Guild for an open recruitment. I've already compiled a list of actors and submitted it to the casting director. They're now looking for someone to go to the audition location at short notice, if they can get in touch and make it in time. Although a second audition has been scheduled, if you go now, you should be able to catch the first audition, which hasn't ended yet. Because if we have enough people, there might not be a second audition. So you'd better go early to have a better chance." Henry took the information and looked at it, sighing. It's a multi-million-dollar production. Before the Titanic struck an iceberg, terrified the film studios, and exploded at the box office, multi-million-dollar productions were already a rarity in Hollywood. Henry thought to himself, after less than 6 months, I've already been able to see a film of this caliber, even as a minor actor. I'm lucky, I guess. Looking at the film's synopsis in the file reminded Henry of a film he'd seen before his time travel. Directed by Andrew Davis, with Ian Milchan as one of the producers, the film was produced by Warner Brothers, one of Hollywood's 8 major studios. The most crucial figure in the film was Steven Seagal, the lead actor and producer. This Russian-born action star, once a hugely popular star, was known for his exceptional fighting skills, even before he began to inject a lot of nonsense into his films. His combat was more like watching a WWE wrestling match than a back and forth. Steven Seagal, a 7th-degree black belt in Aikido, used a single, deadly move, often bringing his opponent to their knees. It was this clean fighting style that quickly cemented his place among Hollywood's action stars. This film, set aboard the battleship Missouri, became his defining work. However, a little understanding of this man reveals a complex character, no ordinary Hollywood star. His private actions are not as sanctimonious as he appears. In fact, anyone who appears in a film, especially a leading role, is no naive naivete. Even those who appear to be burly, brawny, and lacking in brains, likely possess impressive educational background and a profound mindset. But he was merely a supporting actor, at most wearing a soldier's uniform, and had no intention of becoming a star. He probably wouldn't become a thorn in his side and cause him any trouble. Henry's personal experience over the past 3 months has revealed that on set, an actor's social circle is entwined with status. Even when the lead actor and a supporting actor appear in the same scene, they seem to exist in different worlds during filming. Unless the lead actor initiates a conversation with the supporting actor, any attempt to do so will usually only earn the lead actor a look of disdain. After checking the audition location and time, it was on the Warner Brothers set, not far from the Screen Actors Guild. It was that awkward distance where it would take almost as long to walk or drive to it. Henry flicked the paper in his hand with his fingers, gave Marion a wink, and said, "I'll go over and try my luck." "Thanks, sweetie. When you get there, report to Luigi. You know him. He's there as the Screen Actors Guild representative," Marion said. "Understood." Shaking a piece of paper, Henry walked out of the Screen Actors Guild. He didn't use his super speed to get to the Warner Brothers set, but instead drove there. No matter how pressed for time, it wasn't a matter of life and death. There was no need to risk exposing his abilities for such a routine. Besides, driving to the Warner Brothers set would allow him to drive directly out when leaving, without having to walk back to the SAG parking lot. This was also about cultivating a habit. When you're accustomed to using Kryptonian superpowers in your daily life, it's inevitable that you'll use them outside. Conversely, if you were just an ordinary person, you'd be accustomed to handling emergencies the way you would. This was much better than constantly swinging your Kryptonian fist at people. Killing someone was a minor offense, being discovered to be able to kill with a single punch was a major one. Henry didn't want to end up like those superheroes, constantly being watched and caught between a rock and a hard place. As the saying goes, whoever wants to be a superhero can be one. I'm already doing my duty to society by not turning evil. Arriving at the destination, I didn't even need to ask, the audition location was easily spotted. It wasn't inside a building, but rather under a temporarily unused shed with chairs set up for actors awaiting auditions. A small sign hung next to the shed, USS Audition Venue. USS was probably a pseudonym for the film's title. With such a simple venue, it's easy to imagine just how privileged casual actors are in Hollywood. But none of the men present protested, they all sat quietly in their seats, awaiting their chance to audition. Henry also went to the registration area and submitted the information he'd received from the Screen Actors Guild, along with his acting resume. Since he was a casual actor, the audition wasn't very strict. Furthermore, since the other party had asked the Screen Actors Guild to find him at short notice, there wasn't much of a problem with checking in, he just had to wait for the audition. Henry didn't join the others under the awning, instead, he stood in the sun, enjoying the rare spring sunshine. Meanwhile, he observed the other auditions. They were of all colors and ethnicities, but if there was one thing they all had in common, it was their incredibly fit bodies. It was like the kind of person the U.S. Army recruiting office would come and snatch up, each and every one of them a perfect candidate for the military, with no one left out. Thinking of himself as one of those people, Henry found it quite fascinating. His new book has been signed. Please read it, bookmark it, and recommend it. Thanks. Chapter 57 Audition. Henry Brown, the bustling female assistant, called out several names, and Henry followed a group into the studio. A field, currently unused for filming, had been lined up with a few tables to create a simple audition area. A row of sailor and soldier uniforms hung nearby. However, no one asked the auditionees to change into them, they were simply directed to sit in a row at the audition tables. Verified actor resumes were placed on the casting director's desk. Whenever the director saw someone's profile, he would call them up and have them circulate before him. If he found someone he liked, he would ask them a few more questions, or perhaps change into a sailor or soldier uniform, and then have them circulate again. When it was Henry's turn, he saw the other man raise his eyebrows and ask, "Did you write on your photocopied resume that you had a stunt performance qualification?" "Yes, sir. I just completed it recently, so I haven't had time to revise my resume yet." "When was it completed?" "This morning, sir." "Oh. Could you give me a rough idea of what the stunts were like?" Of course, without violating the confidentiality clause, Henry had signed the contracts himself, so he was naturally familiar with the terms. Besides, that B-movie that morning didn't have many confidentiality clauses. So, without getting into the plot, Henry focused on the action, specifically describing what he had accomplished. Everyone was in the film industry, so they naturally knew the ins and outs of it. Just by listening to the general outline, they could imagine what the scene would be like. The casting director asked again, "Whose action team are you with?" "Channing." "Channing Williams." "Oh, that old guy. Then why didn't you sign with him?" "You're only registered with the Screen Actors Guild, sir. I still want to be an actor who can show my face, not a stuntman behind the scenes." This reason was perfect and no one could find fault with it. Who would be willing to be behind the scenes when they have the chance to be in front of the camera? So the casting director didn't continue the topic and asked instead, "Do you get seasick?" Henry replied, "No, sir." "Oh, you're so sure. Do you have a boat at home?" The casting director sneered. "Last October and November, I was in Alaska on a crabbing boat, fishing for king crab in the Bering Sea. I made 4 trips in total, and never got seasick." "Madfuck, Luigi," the Screen Actors Guild representative sitting next to the casting director, exclaimed. "You're a tough guy to be on a crabbing boat. It must be tough out there." He glanced at the actor's profile in the casting director's hand. "It's tough out there, but the rewards are great. Henry said honestly. But you don't have it on your resume. Well, because that doesn't count as an actor's experience, I didn't put it there, Henry said honestly. You have other work experience, so you can put it on there. Sometimes what you've done is more valuable than what you've acted in, Luigi reminded him. Got it, sir. Usually, Screen Actors Guild representatives attend such events to oversee the openness and fairness of the audition process. But sensible crews often give the union representative a little incentive to prevent him from interfering with other people's decisions. Henry Brown's experience prompted a few comments, but they were mostly small talk out of curiosity. He ended the conversation at the right time, showing no intention of being overly polite and avoiding any offense from the casting director. After all, being on a crabbing boat was certainly an experience worth sharing, and everyone was somewhat curious. But the casting director, following protocol, refrained from directly stating the conclusion. Instead, he politely said, "Well, Mr. Brown, please return to your seat. We'll let you know the results later." With no costume fitting required, his chances seemed slim. However, Henry didn't take the risk too seriously and simply returned to his seat. In reality, the casting director had already made a note of Henry. Unless there was a better match, he would be cast as a supporting actor. Because their lead actor frequently injured people, both intentionally and unintentionally, many stuntmen aware of the situation were reluctant to work with this renowned action star. Consequently, they had to pay the action team higher wages to ensure their cooperation. To maintain the filming schedule and avoid having to hire someone at short notice, the casting director had to find more temporary talent. Henry's experience performing stunts as part of the action team meant he wouldn't resist temporary assignments. This was his greatest value. 2 more people were given the chance to change costumes. While they were doing so, the others who hadn't gotten the chance left first. After a typical audition, Henry left the Warner Brothers set. He didn't plan to return to the library to study. Instead, he planned to go to a hardware store that sold electronic parts and buy some. While bulk computer parts were hard to come by, electronic components were readily available. Think of those who started businesses in garages. They all handcrafted their products before considering commercial production. Henry didn't envision using his foresight and manual skills to make himself a millionaire. The world's cutting-edge technology was beyond the imagination of the average person, even though Henry wasn't sure it even existed. Take, for example, Dr. Zor of Hydra, who transformed himself into artificial intelligence due to terminal illness in the 1970s, Hank Pym's Ant-Man costume and Pym particles, and the scientific achievements of organizations like Hydra and SHIELD, which leveraged the power of organizations. If he actually came up with something, would these people or organizations try to recruit him? Or would they let him grow? Furthermore, in the United States, if he wanted to achieve commercial success in emerging IT industries like electronics or the internet, he had to bring in money from Wall Street and play the financial game with Jewish capital. Henry's greatest security and reliance was his Kryptonian abilities. As long as he had enough money, there was no need to tie his hands, create vulnerabilities, and force himself to play by someone else's rules. So, the purpose of buying electronic components was simply to create something he could use, to make his life more convenient or improve his quality of life. Currently, Henry wanted to do 2 things. One was to improve his computer's performance. He wanted at least a workstation-class computer, to lay the groundwork for the burgeoning internet. The other was to get himself a theater-quality speaker system and soundproof his house. Music and movies were his only salvation in this era. If he didn't treat his ears better, the noise from the outside world would become an annoyance. The new book has been signed. Please read, collect and recommend it. Thank you. Chapter 58: The Purpose and Mystery of the Superbrain. Ever since receiving permission to modify the kitchen appliances, Henry had implicitly extended this permission to all areas. Beyond the structural integrity of the house, Henry would handle any additions or replacements needed. He didn't even need to hire workers, he simply bought the materials and did everything himself. Landlord Gary often sent in meals in plastic containers. He simply turned a blind eye to Henry's actions. As long as the house didn't blow up, he could restore it to its original state upon moving out, and everything would be negotiable. So, ever since Henry came across a book about speakers in the library, he couldn't help but embark on this path of no return. After all, these things aren't limited by time, they're all about materials and intelligence. How to design the environment to minimize interference between sound waves. And the optimal listening position is the point where the sound waves converge after a limited amount of rebound. This knowledge has been true for 100 years, and it will remain so for another 100 years. The fundamental principles of concert hall design have never changed. Advances in materials science haven't made much of a difference in signal transmission. The main problem is that alloys simply don't perform as well as expensive pure metals. Difficulties arise from processing, aging, and oxidation. Therefore, a superior coating material is needed to extend the life of the wire and mitigate degradation. With Henry's exceptional intelligence, he quickly devised an affordable solution. After all, there's no such thing as the best, and there's no upper limit on how much one can afford. It's determined by the depth of one's wallet. Henry's handcrafting skills, informed by his Kryptonian heat rays and steel bodies, allowed him to avoid the burden of intellectual capital and patent fees, allowing him to directly purchase the raw materials and process them. For example, for the core material, Henry chose silver, due to its superior conductivity, rather than the more common copper. Silver wire's drawbacks include higher raw material prices and processing difficulties, making it difficult to compare ordinary silver wire to premium copper wire. However, these processing challenges were no problem for Henry, who processed the silver wire to the same high standards as laboratory-grade copper wire. Besides purity issues, there were also differences in crystal structure and density. The density here doesn't refer to physical density, but rather to the voids in the material, present at micrometer to nanometer scales, when the wire is extracted from commercial products. This problem is common in metal products, which explains why ancient forging involved a constant hammering of metal. Besides reducing the carbon content and increasing the hardness of the steel, it also reduces bubbles in the molten metal. After the core is secured, there's the issue of the braid surrounding the core. This is to reduce potential interference with the signal transmitted by the core. As for the outer rubber layer, it protects the wire rather than affecting its sound quality. This processing involves chemistry. To address potential odors and residual waste, Henry overhauled his kitchen exhaust system. Static electricity treatment was no big deal. Henry developed a laboratory-grade, multi-purpose ion treatment system. To create this audio system, Henry drew upon a multidisciplinary background in electronics, materials science, and chemistry. Many ideas are merely a conjecture in university papers. Forget commercializing them, even whether they can be replicated in the lab is a question. Don't think Henry is squandering his superior brain power or wasting his time by doing this. It's like a martial arts master mastering hundreds of martial arts schools, constantly seeking to integrate them through actual combat or similar challenges, developing his own unique style. He might even go on to create a new martial art. Without any practical application, what Henry gained from the library would be nothing more than the knowledge in a book or the contents of a paper. Even if he could recite them by heart, it would only be fragments. But to create a satisfactory sound system, Henry had to consider the layout of his house, the materials available, and the extent of his ability and financial resources. Those books and papers merged in practical application, ultimately manifesting in Henry's creations. Even during the process, Henry constantly pondered whether there were better approaches and could achieve even better results. These demands pushed him to push beyond existing knowledge, experimenting into uncharted territory, and yielding both better and worse results. No wonder they say desire is the driving force behind scientific progress. Without needs and problems, people simply don't consider the unknown. You have to understand that compared to Superman, I don't have access to the Kryptonian technology reserves in the Fortress of Solitude in the Arctic. If I don't study and think, even with a super brain, I'll still be no match for today's Earth scientists. Furthermore, for this sound system, Henry first experienced a way of thinking he hadn't experienced before his time travel. Before his time travel, he had always been an end user. He didn't need to innovate, even his so-called problem-solving was simply applying templates from existing examples. But with a sufficient foundation of knowledge, when faced with a problem, I can not only directly propose a solution using known methods, but also gain additional inspiration. This inspiration can lead me to better methods or achieve better results. And these ideas aren't just unrealistic fantasies, but are feasible and actionable, with real potential for success. Previously, I never experienced inspiration, relying solely on formulas and templates to solve one problem after another. My low-level job ensured I wouldn't encounter problems without solutions. Even if it really happens, the nature of the job allows me to give any answer, and it depends on whether the boss is willing to accept it. If the boss is unwilling, the most he can do is to reject it and redo it. Then, before the deadline, from the very bad and not so bad options, choose a result that he can accept. It's not impossible to achieve perfection, but you just need to spend time polishing it, or find someone else. Anyway, I can't do it. But inspiration is a very wonderful thing. When there is a solid enough foundation and strong logical reasoning ability, the emergence of inspiration is like a natural product. This is not something that applies to any formula or template, but it seems to apply many formulas and templates. This indescribable feeling is where Henry truly feels that he is a different person from before he traveled through time. So, are those memories before the time travel real? Or are they illusions brought about by this Kryptonian superbrain? For a moment, Henry couldn't tell the difference. The new book has been signed. Please read, collect, and recommend it. Thank you. Chapter 59 Good News. Good news, Henry. Good news, Marion said excitedly on the phone. Henry, halfway through dinner, braising his meat and waiting for the rice cooker to finish, received this call out of the blue. He glanced at the clock on the wall and said curiously, I thought it was time to get off work, so you wouldn't be doing anything. Why don't you go home and rest early? Union agents are still agents. Have you ever seen an agent have off-duty time? Marion complained. And this is good news about you. Don't you want to know it sooner? Oh, sweetheart, I'm more concerned about your quality of life. Don't overwork yourself. Of course, I'm happy to hear the good news, and even more happy that you thought of me first. Tisk, 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 tisk. I'm jealous of all the girls you've tricked with your words before, Marion exclaimed on the phone. Could it be that you're not lonely at all and just want to get rid of me? How could that be? I'm a poor man who has to cook for myself. And then spend the whole evening watching soap operas on TV. How boring is that? Can you imagine? Although the evening program was just a casual remark, boring was indeed Henry's feeling. After all, entertainment in this era was too monotonous for him, who had experienced it before time travel. His evening activities were usually listening to music while tinkering with his computer. Whether it was programming or system development, Henry enjoyed it, but it was more about the sense of accomplishment than the fun. It was a different feeling. What a shame. I'm waiting for my day to pick me up, so I'm stuck in the guild. You're playing pity now, but it won't help me, honey. It's too late. I gave you my number a long time ago. If you'd asked me out sooner, I wouldn't have thought about you, haha. Henry laughed awkwardly. Ever since learning the American manly way of speaking in Alaska, Henry has indeed shown some signs of letting himself go, but he hasn't dared to compromise his chastity. Do you know what was the most popular thing in America in the 90s? Answer, AIDS. DC Superman has experienced a cold, though not in the canonical works. But it also shows that under certain conditions, Kryptonians exposed to the sun are not immune to viruses. So, would Henry still dare to jump? It's true that his Kryptonian eyes have X-ray vision, but at most they can only see how many bone screws someone has had inserted, or more superficially, things like the color of their underwear. If it's a disease with obvious features like cancer or blood clots, you might be able to tell. But if you want to tell if someone has a viral infection, you're making it difficult for a Kryptonian. After spending 2 days at the hospital, visiting various wards, Henry could clearly state that there were many illnesses that Kryptonian super eyes couldn't detect. Combined with super sense and other abilities, the range of diseases that could be identified would indeed expand, but there would still be blind spots. As for whether Kryptonian supervision could detect virus-sized objects, that's somewhat pointless. Bacteria are one thing, but do you know how quickly viruses reproduce and mutate? Oral bacteria can undergo at least 3 to 5 generations of growth in a single night, potentially turning harmless ones into harmful ones. This is one reason why we brush our teeth and rinse our mouths when we wake up. Viruses reproduce at an even faster rate. Trying to identify a disease by observing a virus's appearance would be a real challenge for aliens. Perhaps there are detection methods that could be applied to Kryptonian abilities, but Henry felt that further research in this area was a bit of a tangent. In short, even if it wasn't HIV, Henry wouldn't be able to identify latent syphilis, which lacks obvious symptoms. So, Henry really didn't want to compromise his chastity in a place like Hollywood. Especially since this place is adjacent to the San Fernando Valley. Don't pretend you're Kryptonian and immune to all poisons. Besides, you can talk big, but do you really think you're a bulldozer? If you run up too many unpriced debts, wouldn't that defeat the purpose of living a shabby life? Each of these will become your weaknesses. If those shady organizations discover them, will they be so righteous as to refrain from exploiting them? It's better to believe that this universe is a fairy tale universe where pigs become spider ham, and then people never die. So, Henry once again chose to laugh off Marian's hints and get away with it. He then said, "Sweetheart, stop spoiling my appetite. What good news do you want to tell me?" "Well, if you really can't wait to get rid of me, hey, it's unfair. I'm so sad. I just didn't want to disturb your date." This is so rude. At the same time, Henry heard a man shouting from the phone, "Sweetheart, I'm coming. Are you ready?" Marian covered the phone and shouted, "Sweetheart, wait a minute, I have a business call," but Henry could still hear the voice. Marian, who was back on the phone, sounded a little depressed and said, "Well, I really can't delay too long. The good news I want to tell you is that the production team of Devil Warrior has notified you that you have accepted their passerby actor." "Oh, this is indeed good news. I think I should have a good dream tonight," Henry said with a smile. "So remember to come to the union to get your documents these next few days. We'll be on set soon. This time, they're asking for you to stay with the crew the entire time." "Oh, that's a pretty unusual request," Henry said, raising an eyebrow. "Normally, only the paid lead actors are required to stay with the crew for the entire shoot. If there's any behind-the-scenes work required, such as press interviews or dubbing, they're also required to be present. If an actor wants to do other things or has other commitments, they must ask the director-producer for time off. However, extras are a bit different. Most are paid daily or hourly wages. This means that to save money, the production team can consolidate scenes requiring extras, shortening the time they were used. Or, they can call them in at short notice if they have a related shoot scheduled that day. In this way, they don't have to pay the extras for the entire shoot. Even if someone can't make it on a last-minute basis, is there a problem with a last-minute replacement? If so, they wouldn't be considered extras. Henry was a bit surprised by Marian's request for a full-time crew member. But even if he was surprised, some production teams were so wealthy they could afford to hire so many people. Who wouldn't be happy to just sit there and do nothing for free? But the details depended on the contract and documents they sent. Henry smiled and said, "I understand. I'll go to the union tomorrow to get the documents." "Okay, I'm going to hang up now. Have a nice night. It's a shame it's not for you," Marian said regretfully. "The new book has been signed. Please read, bookmark, and recommend it. Thank you." Chapter 60. Joining the group. Henry finished filming the B-movie and calmly shifted to the production team of Devil Warrior. Arriving at the meeting point on the first day, he saw military personnel handing out confidentiality agreements to all team members, both on and off camera, for signature. Of course, the main cast, supporting actors, director, producer, and other key members of the production team were not present. Those with higher status naturally received different treatment. For crews with a strong sense of confidentiality, especially large-scale productions, having actors and backstage staff sign such agreements is common practice. But this one was incredibly thick. Considering the average Hollywood actor has a low level of education, and many suffer from dyslexia, grappling with such a thick document without a lawyer was a real challenge. Some of the obviously newcomers, including Henry, reluctantly began to carefully read through it. The veterans, glanced through it casually before flipping to the last page and quickly signing their names. A newcomer, clearly familiar with the veterans, asked in surprise, "Brother, you didn't even read the entire document. Aren't you afraid of problems down the road?" The veteran, cigarette in hand, replied arrogantly, "Why bother? The film's confidentiality is pretty much what it is. We won't have access to the script, so the non-disclosure clause doesn't really concern us. It just means no photos on set or casually leaking information to reporters. The main reason we're filming appears to be naval-related, so we've signed an additional non-disclosure agreement, but we're also not allowed to bring unauthorized photography equipment, and when in a military zone, we must stay within the restricted area. And we're also required to follow military orders and not wander around or look around. Those things will be explained before entering the military zone. We'll just follow their instructions when they say so. There's no need to read all this stuff now." The veteran impatiently shook the signed non-disclosure agreement in his hand and stepped forward to hand it to the military personnel. He added, "Brother, I just wanted to ask, is there a place to smoke once we get there?" The Navy officer wasn't too serious. He said casually, "The ship's control officer will tell you where the smoking area is." Don't litter cigarette butts, just don't cause trouble for the brothers to clean up. Okay, brother, I'm fine. With a veteran taking the lead, the others naturally followed suit, not even carefully reading the contents of the confidentiality agreement, and simply flipping to the signature area to sign. Henry didn't want to be out of line, but he still used his superpowers to quickly read through the agreement, taking not much longer than the others. Based on his knowledge of American law from the library, the confidentiality agreement was quite standard, without any traps or entrapments. So he also signed the name Henry Brown. Incidentally, because the tax filing deadline of April 15th was approaching, Henry read the relevant tax laws and filed his own tax forms. This was no difficult task for his super brain. The only difference between Henry and lawyers and accountants now was that he lacked the relevant qualifications and licenses. This was a U.S. regulation, and without the relevant qualifications, one could not take the license exam at the very least. One had to attend a correspondence university and obtain an equivalent degree. Otherwise, Henry would have to get himself some kind of accountant's license. After finishing the confidentiality agreement, the assistant director came over to take over. He handed out the information and said, "The shooting plan is roughly as written in the information in your hands. What's more important is that we will be shooting at the San Diego Naval Base for a period of time. At that time, everyone will live in a hotel in San Diego City, and the production team will be in charge. Those who have part-time jobs or odd jobs elsewhere at night, remember to tell your boss that you need to take leave during this period and cannot arrange work. I don't care if you want to travel back and forth between Los Angeles and San Diego. But if you want to slow down the shooting progress, you must be prepared to breach the contract and pay compensation. The shooting work in the naval base cannot be extended just because we want to. If something goes wrong and the movie is ruined, you can't afford to lose the money you earn in your lifetime. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." A few of the more well-behaved newcomers answered in twos and threes. Of course, they were not taken directly to the San Diego Naval Base to film on the first day of work. Everyone stayed on the Warner Brothers studio to change clothes and do makeup. The most troublesome ones were of course the main actors. They would not have only one set of costumes in the movie, and they would even have several sets of the same costumes. The tone of the entire movie began to develop under the control of the director from this time. In comparison, the costumes of the passers-by were relatively simple. Don't look at them as background characters. Although their respective storylines are not stated in the script, and even a one-sentence character biography may not be written. But how many people are needed for each scene, and what kind of background these people have, are all clearly written in Hollywood scripts. Taking the simplest element of good and evil confrontation in this action movie as an example, there must be some people playing the role of the good guys waiting to be saved by the protagonist, and some people playing the role of the villains who fight against the protagonist. Most production teams use extras separately. They won't have a specific actor dressed as a hero in one scene, following the protagonist like a sidekick, only to be dressed as a villain in the next, engaging in a fistfight with a protagonist. This is because some incredibly bored haters will actually replay the film frame by frame, trying to find cleverly hidden Easter eggs or accidental flaws. The latter is often more controversial than the former, and those found guilty will naturally be vilified, becoming a laughingstock for a long time, or even a lifelong struggle. As for whether some production teams are so wealthy as to replace a whole group of actors per scene, it's not impossible. However, using makeup, changing hairstyles, and wearing different costumes is generally not easy to tell apart when the focus is off. Unless there are obvious inconsistencies, using a fixed group of extras is actually more beneficial to the production team within the contract. After all, they are auditioned. If they were to replace them every scene, the workload would increase tremendously. Henry was unexpectedly assigned a submariner's uniform. This character, considered a villain in the film, has the potential to engage in combat scenes with a protagonist, so it was mostly handled by members of the action team, with few individual actors like Henry. However, upon receiving the uniform from the prop master, Henry was stunned by a sympathetic look. He felt as if someone would open a door and ask if he had cleaned his ass. Fortunately, that didn't happen. The Kryptonian, hidden in Hollywood, had successfully become a member of the Devil's War team. Chapter 61 Exclusive Restaurant. "Chef, give me a steak. I feel like I could eat a cow right now." Henry arrived at the restaurant in the studio's lounge area, where the production team hired their own chefs. The head chef was a black man, incredibly wide, his waist probably equal to his height. At first glance, no one could be sure if he knew how to cook, but one could be sure he knew how to eat. This chef emerged from the lounge, adjusting his chef's hat. Even though there wasn't a single hair on his head that could possibly fall into his cooking, he meticulously dressed himself. Seeing him, the black man laughed heartily and said, "Henry, we're just wrapping up." Henry selected a few flavors from the overflowing donut table and piled a plate full. He poured himself a cup of black coffee and said, "It can't be helped. The director has very high standards for the visuals. Any missteps mean we have to start over. Every time we make a mistake, the props team has to reset everything before we can reshoot. If this goes on for a few takes, it would be strange if it took less time." "You're not holding them back, are you?" Blackie said with a smile as he grilled steak. "If it were me, I'd still be listening to the assistant director's lecture." "You know why I came to eat with you first?" Blackie asked curiously. "Could it be those two groups picking on each other again?" Henry muttered, stuffing his mouth full with a donut. "There are 3 producers alone, and unless Mr. Seagull steps in, no one will give in. When the player plays, the pawns suffer. Isn't that normal?" Besides lead actor and producer Steven Seagal, the other 2 producers each had their own supporters within the team. They might not dare to openly confront or sabotage the work, but they could easily make things difficult for the other team. "Then how did you stay safe? Do you have a stronger backer? Tell me, is it an underwater volcano?" "I'm just a casual actor signed by the Screen Actors Guild, a retail investor, not even qualified to be a pawn. Nothing could possibly implicate me, and besides, no one's watching me." "Isn't that even better?" Henry spoke the truth. As a relatively unknown figure on the set, he happily reaped the benefits of his boss's services. Thinking back to his pre-time travel dreams, he'd simply gotten paid for doing nothing all day. Now that it had come true, how could he possibly be dissatisfied? So, as a bystander actor with no connections or backing, Henry had no one to look after him. While being sidelined, he felt like he had a privileged seat at the table. Anyway, the pay couldn't get any lower. Even if there wasn't even a single shot, cut out entirely by the editing process, I'd get paid for every day I was with the cast. Turning the steak over, Blackie asked, "I heard Erica Elenico joined the crew today. Did you see her? Is she as hot as Shawnee from Baywatch?" He gulped his coffee and swallowed the donut in his mouth. Henry exclaimed in amazement, "Oh my God, you can't imagine what it's like to see her in person. It was so close, I could almost feel her fragrant breath. I could see the pulse of her blood through her skin. A turn of her head, a flick of her hair, a frown, a smile, everything played out vividly before my eyes. This feeling can't be captured on a screen, whether it's a television screen or a cinema screen. You have to see her with your own eyes to experience her in the flesh. No wonder so many wealthy and powerful people aren't satisfied with just seeing them on screen. They're willing to pay a huge price just to get a glimpse of their beauty." Henry's words were absolutely true. Even though he had seen countless T-slot goddesses before his time travel, his eyes were captivated by her stunning face and stunning figure. This was a hard lesson for Henry, who thought he had seen countless women. What you see on the screen is truly different from what you see in person. Lao He pressed the steak against the iron plate with a large fork, making a sizzling sound. He grinned and said, "Mad fake, just listening to what you said makes me feel like a stone. You know, Erica made her debut in Steven Spielberg's science fiction blockbuster, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, playing a school beauty who had her first kiss with a protagonist. I thought this girl was so cute. When she became a Playboy magazine playmate in July 1989, announcing her high-profile return to the entertainment industry, I was really looking forward to her performance. Shawnee in Baywatch made me fall completely in love with this girl. It's a pity that until today, I haven't seen her come to the restaurant for dinner. Otherwise, I would definitely treat her with my specialty dishes, and she would fall in love with me after eating them." Old Black put the fried steak on the plate with a fork and handed it to Henry, who had finished most of the donuts. Because it was not a formal steak meal, there were no other side dishes except steak. "Anyway, if you want to eat vegetables, there are all kinds of vegetables at the salad bar." Henry cut the steak with a knife and fork, stuffed a bite into his mouth, and began his routine criticism. "I really don't mean to be disrespectful. Chef, did you learn your cooking skills from the British or the Germans?" Old Black grinned, revealing a row of shiny white teeth. He said, "Even if your mouth is more picky than Michelin's secret guests, my certificate from the French Le Cordon Bleu is not fake." Henry sneered as he continued to eat his steak. "This is all the stuff the French Le Cordon Bleu teaches. Looking at the side, there are a lot of carbohydrate foods. Whether they taste good or not is another matter, but they are definitely filling. Even the steak is fried in a rather rough cowboy style. If the 3-star Michelin chefs saw this, they would have a cerebral hemorrhage first. Lao He said with disdain, "Come on. No matter what kind of food, delicious or not, Americans can swallow it with tomato sauce. Believe it or not, if I cook a baked snail, it will not be more popular than the donuts over there, so, you are just perfunctory like this." The production team is paid too little, Lao He said seriously. To be honest, the salary is really not small. But I also find it strange. I usually prepare catering for those rich people. I take care of everything from wine to top quality ingredients. This is my first time serving as a dedicated chef for a film crew, and it's a 24/7 job. If the pay was less, I wouldn't have taken it, Henry asked. Didn't a producer hire your crew? I've met those people, but their circle wouldn't hire me. I initially thought I might run into past clients on set, so I worked diligently for a few days. But I didn't see anyone I knew, so I'm even more confused than you are. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 62 Hometown Cuisine. Henry, a marginal figure, naturally had no answer to the chef's question. Adhering to the principle of make the best of it, he said, "Whatever. As long as everyone's happy with the food, you've accomplished your mission. And you've found the secret to success, haven't you?" The two of them gazed at the newly replenished donut counter, salad bar, and high-end coffee machine. Hard-working Americans are so easily fooled. If they tried to make some molecular cuisine or mushroom and clam soup, they'd flip the tables right there. Wild boars can't handle fine bran. But looking at the sloppy table, which even during normal mealtimes boasted a wider variety, Old Black still asked with a guilty conscience, "Do you think I should make some changes? If my boss saw this, would he think I wasn't doing my job well?" "This job is actually a test," Henry spoke frankly. "No matter how good a dish is, it's just one big platter, ready for everyone to take. Then everyone can choose whatever they want. Once you do that, even with top-notch ingredients, that plasticky, cheap feel is hard to shake off. So, do you have any ideas?" These days, the only person Old Black can chat with about cooking, not just for commercial spiel, is Henry, a bystander. As a chef, Old Black can tell when someone truly understands food, or just follows the crowd. That's why, at this moment, he'd ask Henry for his thoughts. "Maybe, you could try your hometown cuisine. I think the truly wealthy would be tired of all that French, Italian, and Spanish food. What hometown cuisine could I possibly have?" Blackie wasn't Chinese, so he didn't miss his hometown cuisine that much. He grumbled, "Do you expect to see roasted bananas, boiled bananas, dried bananas, banana platter, banana porridge, and banana soup here?" Henry frowned and asked, "Why all bananas?" "Hey, bananas are a staple food back home. Just like rice in Asia and bread in Europe and America. Do you want to know more about how to cook bananas?" Just mentioning that is giving me a burst of inspiration. Oh, God, spare me. That face of yours gives me the feeling I'm going to drown in bananas. It's okay if I don't eat bananas. There's a very special dish popular in my hometown, roasted lion, Blackie said mysteriously. This mention made Henry's eyes widen in shock. "You guys are so wild, you even roast lions?" "Yeah, it's a traditional dish from our hometown. Every time we send 3 or 4 hunters to hunt lions." "Wait a minute," Henry interrupted Blackie, asking, "since it's a traditional dish, what weapons do you use?" "Just spears. We can't use guns. The taste would be different with guns, so? Just using spears, 3 or 4 people can hunt a lion?" "You're really good at hunting," Blackie snorted twice and said proudly, "because once a lion is full, its desire to attack and its ability to move will decrease. Then the remaining person can kill the lion and bring it back to the village to roast." Wow. Your village has such wild games." Henry was shocked. "This is the fairest way to choose when multiple warriors want to marry the chief's daughter, because usually only one will return. Who can say that a warrior who can hunt a lion is not qualified to marry the chief's daughter?" Henry shook his head and sighed. "Wow, this is unimaginable. This kind of food has already gone beyond the level of delicious or not." The Old Black man, who was originally talking seriously, suddenly showed a happy expression. His 2 rows of big teeth were particularly white and shiny. He laughed heartily and said, "Haha, I scared you, you." "Oh, I'm kidding." Henry raised his hands in surrender and said, "You are awesome, Chef, you are really awesome. You really scared me. I thought you lion hunters were so wild." The 2 of them exchanged a black fist bump. The proud old black man said, "Maybe I didn't make it up. I heard it from my grandfather. My grandfather said that he heard it from his grandfather. But you know, there is no written history, only word of mouth. Who knows which things are just the bragging of those old people who want to win the favor of their grandchildren." "Well, what did you say? A clear and stupid look of admiration." "Yes. It's a clear and stupid look of admiration. Do those who want to be big stars particularly like to be looked at like this? Just like my elders, if you can't fool the adults, you have to fool the children." Who knows, in no time, Henry finished all the food he had taken and drank a large glass of soda. Because this is a film crew and it is working hours, the restaurant does not provide alcoholic beverages. Otherwise, seeing a group of actors and staff drunkenly filming, the producer would be furious. Not to mention that the producer would also get drunk. When he sees the financial account books, no matter how drunk he is, he will explode on the spot. Suddenly, Henry's ears moved, and then he quickly cleaned the table and put the plates and cutlery on the recycling station. He said, "Oh, I should go to the filming location. Maybe they are getting ready to start filming again." Go. Old Black, of course, knew that the people here prioritize filming and wouldn't force anyone to stay. Henry's words were certainly not nonsense. Under his super oral observation, the assistant director in charge of extras began gathering the previously disbanded actors for training for the next scene. On film sets, extras were mostly handled by several action teams. Their approach was simple: they assigned someone to frequently accompany the assistant director or to be stationed on set. Whenever a production needed someone, they could quickly gather their own crew. But there was a problem: Henry wasn't part of any of the action teams. So, when they called for someone, they didn't necessarily include him. This wasn't their fault, as it wasn't anyone else's responsibility. While expecting actors to be on call all the time was somewhat unreasonable, not having them show up when filming was needed was even more absurd. And this was Henry's current situation. While he wasn't specifically targeted, he felt a subtle sense of marginalization. However, this marginalization wasn't malicious, it was simply that others had no obligation to help him, leaving Henry to figure things out on his own. After all, he wasn't part of anyone's team. Henry hadn't considered fitting in. Luckily, his Kryptonian ability, super hearing, could solve such minor issues. Henry just had to make his actions appear natural, and with a little luck, he'd just walked back and not miss filming. Then no one would bother him, so why not? Chapter 63: San Diego Naval Base. The filming in the studio quickly concluded. Next came the film's highlight, the scenes aboard the warship. However, when the entire crew arrived at the San Diego Naval Base, Henry was stunned by what they saw. The majority of the film Devil's War takes place on warships, so finding a warship for actual filming was the most advantageous approach. Not only did this ensure the scenes were authentic, they were already real, but it also saved significant costs on building sets. However, this required the cooperation of the U.S. Navy. Before Henry's time travel, this film was a hit action film of the year. It's undoubtedly the perfect movie for anyone without a girlfriend. Because he loved the film, he made a special effort to learn more about the behind-the-scenes stories. Furthermore, during a film's release, there's a constant barrage of news coverage to boost box office revenue, so naturally, more information becomes available. For example, the film's main location is the USS Missouri, the U.S. Navy's only active battleship. However, the interior shots were actually filmed aboard the USS Alabama, a decommissioned battleship now used as a museum ship. The submarine used by the villain was played by the USS Drum, a Gatto-class submarine that served during World War II and was also decommissioned as a museum ship. The only scenes of the USS Missouri appearing in the film are exterior shots of the ship sailing in Pearl Harbor, the Pacific Ocean, and San Francisco Bay. As for the battleship's command room, the scene of the final decisive battle, the military was clearly not going to allow the filmmakers to arbitrarily set off explosives and blow up what was essentially the heart of the ship due to the extensive damage. Even on a decommissioned museum ship, even the slightest trace of blasting bullets was unacceptable. Furthermore, Actual filming would have raised concerns about exposing military equipment. Don't assume that exposing these pieces of World War II antiques is a good idea. Some equipment is valuable beyond its core, its very layout is a secret that cannot be disclosed. Therefore, the command room scenes were filmed using military-provided materials and constructed elsewhere. This was the portion that had previously been filmed on a soundstage. Other shipboard scenes involving explosions and destruction were handled similarly. Just because the U.S. Navy has loaned a warship as a filming location doesn't mean the production team can mess around with it. Under these circumstances, Henry had originally assumed the production team would film in Mobile Bay, Alabama, where the battleship USS Alabama was stored as a museum ship. Whether reactivating the mothballed battleship or simply towing it to San Diego using a tugboat, the cost would far outweigh the expense of transporting the entire crew and equipment to Alabama and then returning after filming. However, Henry was surprised to see the behemoth USS Missouri, the third Iowa-class ship, bearing the serial number 63, measuring 270 meters in length and displacing 45,000 tons, in the San Diego harbor. Besides the unmistakable serial number, another distinguishing feature was the conversion of the secondary gun emplacements on either side of the bridge into missile launchers. These were also the locations where the Tomahawk cruise missiles were launched at the end of the film. This was the result of a modernization, not the original Iowa-class design. Seeing familiar crew members loading filming equipment onto this active battleship, the idea that the ship was merely a coincidence was dispelled before it even began to form. Henry, a Kryptonian time traveler, could only stare in amazement. This world was too fantastical. Just making a movie, and they were using active battleships. Not those decommissioned, sealed hunks of metal, their weapons mostly dismantled. These were the largest war machines ever made, capable of unleashing powerful cannons and devouring humans with blood. Aircraft carriers were merely combat platforms, nothing compared to them. It was like filming a counter-terrorism movie and actually dragging the U.S. military into the Middle East, beating up some local militia, and having the production crew film them. Was this a film production or a documentary? Seeing a familiar assistant director walk by, Henry asked in surprise, "Brother, are we really going to film a movie on this monster, really?" "We have this opportunity thanks to our leading lady," the assistant director said, unloading boxes of materials from his car. Seeing that the other person couldn't finish the load by himself, Henry picked up 2 boxes and followed the assistant director, one on each side, quietly asking, "I heard that Mr. Siegel and the other producers seem to have used the female lead's position to date a lot of women. Doesn't Erica have any connection with them?" People can feel distant simply because the topic isn't right, and they avoid talking too much. This is also the difference between social anxiety and social prowess. Henry and the assistant director weren't particularly close, they were just colleagues on the production team. But when it came to gossip, especially about women, who wouldn't be happy to chat? Especially since Henry was helping with the load and was very tactful with his words. He didn't directly ask how many women our producer had slept with, or who they were. If he had asked such a question, he'd have been worried he'd tell reporters or tabloids about it. But since it was just a date, he could talk about it. So the assistant director took a few steps closer to Henry and said in a low voice, "Actually, Mr. Siegel originally wanted other actresses who could cooperate, and Erica was not the first choice. But you also know that this movie lacks the assistance of the military, so we can only shoot on set or play with some models. Not only will the watchability be greatly reduced, but we don't know to what extent the production cost will increase. In order to connect with the military, we found a suitable candidate." The other party directly persuaded the U.S. Navy to agree to lend an active battleship as a filming location. In exchange, the choice of the heroine, well, you know. So as the only female star in the production team, who would not be interested in her if we don't consider those female stand-ins? But who in Hollywood dares to reach out? The power for sex transactions in Hollywood have devoured countless women with unique conditions. They are forced to use themselves as bargaining chips and put themselves on the table that cannot be exposed to negotiate conditions with others. But if behind a certain woman is a person who can pull out the active battleships of the U.S. Navy for a stroll, wanting to touch such a woman is definitely a prelude to an accident on the set. Since they have a main gun that can fire. Then if the main gun goes off accidentally and someone is killed, isn't that a natural accident? No one can find any fault. Anyway, in the end, just give a subtitle at the beginning or end of the film, "We especially remember someone," or add a sentence "Thank you for his efforts," and the matter will end successfully. Related events can also be hyped by film studios to increase the exposure of the film. Celebrating a funeral as a wedding is simply a good thing to kill two birds with one stone. Chapter 64: A Day in the Extras. In a narrow corridor, a group of men, armed with rifles, fired recklessly. Henry was among them, at the very end. Suddenly, a bear-like man burst from cover. With a single thrown knife, he knocked down the man in the front, then, taking advantage of a blind spot, charged forward. A series of sharp blows followed, and everyone fell. Henry, standing at the very end of the line, was no exception. He was struck by a chokehold, sent flying and tumbling to the ground as if hit by a truck. The man who had attacked him, accompanied by a short, blonde woman in a jacket, her lower body seemingly missing, passed through the corridor without a backward glance. Cut. Okay, everyone, prepare for the next scene, the director shouted through a tin megaphone. Immediately, the crew behind the camera began adjusting the camera, preparing different angles and shots. These shots would be used to capture the protagonist's movements within the warship. In reality, the shots were simply repeated from a few different positions, with varying angles. After all, this was an active warship, and the production crew couldn't just run around everywhere. So, repeated shots of him entering and exiting from different angles and directions were filmed, allowing for the illusion of movement through editing. Henry, having just been killed, stood up like the other extras, and another group would be assigned to play the defeated villains. But that didn't mean Henry could just call it a day and go home. He was now dying several times a day, allowing the director to accumulate as much footage as possible for editing. After all, there was no rule that anyone could only die once. Which shot ended up being used depended entirely on which scenes of the protagonist best served to tie together the plot, regardless of how dramatic Henry's demise might be. Of course, it's possible that none of them were cut, leaving Henry completely absent from the final film. This was common for extras, who were essentially background characters on the same level as trees and walls. Actors from other action crews naturally had members of their own crew temporarily assist them, handing them towels and checking for damage to their costumes and makeup, requiring replacements or touch-ups. Henry, alone, had to do all this on his own. The reason for the scrutiny was that Steven Seagal's realistic-looking fight sequences on screen required perfectly timed reactions to every move. Not too early, or it would look fake. But too late, and the fight would be real. A solid blow from the leading man, who was also a martial arts instructor, would have been fatal or seriously injured. That's why Henry, despite not being part of the action team, was also assigned the role of the defeated villain. It was exhausting the actors. To avoid delays in filming on the battleship, everyone was injured and then back again. As long as they didn't get killed or maimed, they had to take turns on camera. This supposedly desirable situation became like torture, causing the actors immense distress. No wonder stuntmen often accused Steven Seagal of using filming as an excuse to assault people, even making headlines. Henry had no trouble coordinating these shots, he just had to perform the knockout gesture at the last moment. He didn't dare let a lead actor actually hide him. If he ended up getting hurt while doing so, he'd be damned. But as the defeated villain, even if Henry wasn't injured like the others, he wouldn't be able to be present for every scene. So, filming opportunities had to be made available. Those not currently filming were to be stationed in the ship's designated rest area. The passageways were too narrow, and a crowd of unrelated personnel would only hinder filming. The rest area was located on the deck, cordoned off as a restricted area. The film crew wasn't allowed outside the cordon, and the officers and soldiers on duty on board weren't allowed inside. That was the theoretical arrangement, but the crew's rest area was stocked with snacks, drinks, and ashtrays. For the American soldiers, who were known for their greed, not asking for anything was a greater pain than killing their parents. Of course, the production team couldn't forbid the soldiers from using the rest area. Even if someone crossed the line, as long as the supervising military police didn't say anything, the crew pretended to be unaware of the ban and chatted freely with the soldiers. Henry, who had ascended the deck, approached the ship's side. The Missouri hadn't left port, but remained at its berth. The scenes in the film showing the ship on deck, surrounded by the sea, were a post-production addition. Because the battleship was in port, this massive steel behemoth was unaffected by the wind and waves, and moving on it felt as stable as walking on dry land. The question of seasickness during the audition was completely unnecessary. This side of the rest area was designed to face the port. A gangway was built nearby, allowing for easy disembarkation. This convenience was due to the production team having a considerable amount of supplies and equipment stored on the dock. Items not immediately needed were not easily brought aboard. This included makeshift makeup areas and changing rooms, all located on land, not on the ship. Henry poured himself a cup of coffee and gulped it down. He casually crushed the paper cup and tossed it into the trash. Then he walked to the smoking area, lit a cigarette, and chatted with a group of chain smokers. Since his accidental discovery of the secrets of this alternate universe movie, Henry's life hasn't changed much. He hasn't even felt the desire to uncover the mystery behind that figure. The oft-heard saying, "When you gaze into the abyss gazes back into you," isn't just reserved for the indescribable, like the beginning of some bizarre event. It can be applied to anything, to anyone. When an investigation is launched into someone or something, it inevitably leaves traces. When the opponent is anything but ordinary, one's actions are likely to alert the enemy, drawing their attention. Henry wished he'd never come into contact with someone of that level. How could he possibly be interested in investigating someone with the power to mobilize an active battleship? How different was that from alerting them to his own safety? Did they think their life was too comfortable? After all, they weren't targeting him, they were after the female lead. Their connection was simply that they were filming on the same set. Besides, she was the star-studded heroine, while he was just an insignificant background actor. Even if he tried to get close to her, he would be turned down. So Henry smoked his cigarette with a clear conscience, tapping his fingers lightly on the railing as if playing the piano. Chapter 65 Piano Fingering. Is your fingering to Liszt piano music? A sailor approached and asked. Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2. A noisy classic, isn't it? Henry replied directly. He then added, I've been reading about piano lately. Unfortunately, there's no piano at home, so I can only move my fingers and pretend there's one. Aha, your fingering and movement are quite standard, so I recognized it. Have you been learning for a long time? In the United States, there's no custom of handing out cigarettes to everyone. But offering a cigarette to a fellow smoker is still a good way to start a conversation. So Henry pulled the cigarette case from his breast pocket and shook out a cigarette. The sailor didn't refuse, taking one between his lips and lighting it. After taking a long drag, he said, I do have an old piano at home that I really love, and I've been learning to play it for a long time. I joined the army to save up for music school. Henry poured cold water on him, saying, if you joined the army because you needed money, can you really become a pianist? Can a child from a poor family learn to play the piano and become an international pianist? It's wishful thinking. The real goal is to increase employment opportunities for piano teachers. The sailor, feeling cold, smiled bitterly and said, You're really not being tactful at all. Henry pointed a finger and said, to succeed in music, you need to have a wealthy family or two parents who are also in the same profession. It's not impossible to succeed on your own based solely on interest, but it's too difficult. Only if you have this kind of awareness can you use the money you earn in the army to study music. Wow, you're talking just like my mother. Are you trying to win her over? Do you know Brian May, the guitarist from Queen? Henry asked. The sailor nodded. Henry said, he majored in physics and mathematics in school and also taught. Music was just his hobby, his talent was the key to his success. Even without music, he still had a legitimate career. If you're just interested in music and want to spend the money to attend a music school without considering how you'll make money in the future, then most of the people here are what you'll end up like. Henry pointed at the actors chatting and gossiping in the lounge area. The main actors, both the lead and the supporting characters with lines, rested in a separate, more comfortable area. The sailor, of course, recognized them. There weren't many actors he knew here. Curiously, he asked, Don't you make money? It's different from what I've heard. The ones who make money are the big stars. The people you see here only make money because they act. When there's no work, they have to find odd jobs, otherwise, they can't even pay the rent. Tell me, do we make money? Henry was referring to the situation of most people, not himself. With his crab boat salary as a foundation, Henry lived a comfortable life. The sailor, undeterred, said, I've thought about that. But the musical path isn't limited to being a pianist. The piano is the king of instruments. As long as I understand music theory, there's actually a lot I can do. Isn't that right? Indeed, Henry said without denying it. In today's global music scene, British and American music reign supreme, followed by the music of various countries. He could say this because these two markets are the largest, and the rewards for musicians are the highest. No musician in any country doesn't want to find their way into the American music arena. A huge market also means a huge job market. Otherwise, how could there be so many people producing music to satisfy everyone's ears? Henry turned and asked, "Speaking of piano, since I've been learning it blindly by reading books, you've been learning since childhood. Is there a recommended order for learning, or which piano pieces are essential to practice? Could you tell me about that? Whether in the East or the West, there's no one who doesn't like to be a teacher." Since Henry asked so sincerely, the sailor naturally recounted his piano lessons with remarkable detail. Although his family wasn't wealthy, he had found a piano teacher and taken a few lessons. With this foundation, coupled with his own hard work, and the ease of obtaining classical piano sheet music in this era, these were the advantages sailors had when learning piano on their own. So, he knew all about these things. Henry would occasionally hear piano pieces he had memorized in his lessons, and the two of them would demonstrate and discuss fingering techniques on the spot. But Henry wasn't actually tapping his fingers on the battleship's railing, pretending to play the piano. He was using sonar to explore the entire structure of the battleship Missouri. He hadn't intended to do this at first, he'd simply tap the battleship's hull while smoking in the lounge area. The reflected sound waves, collected by his super hearing, formed a 3D model in his mind using his super brain. This was the exact structure of the ship near where he was. Henry, in a playful mood, tried to refine his methods and complete the schematics in his mind. He couldn't quite pinpoint the reason. He simply wanted to create a set of battleship designs, just not on paper. After all, this thing was a military weapon, and blueprints couldn't be found in a library. Even though the Iowa class was designed during World War II, it seems all nations capable of building warships tend to keep some tricks up their sleeves when it comes to shipbuilding. For example, the exact dimensions of the Yamato, the Japanese battleship known as the world's largest during World War II, remain a secret to this day. Of course, there are reasons for public disclosure. But the claims that those figures are false have been persistent, both before and now. The Iowa-class battleship Henry is standing on appears to share the same tradition of concealment. According to technical data available in the library, the battleship USS Missouri displaced 45,000 tons at standard load and 56,270 tons at full load. Its length was 887 feet 3 inches, its waterline was 860 feet, and its beam was 108 feet 2 inches at the waterline. The thickest armor, at the guns, was 19.7 inches. The sides were 12.1 inches, the deck 7.5 inches, and the bulkheads 11.3 inches. However, Henry, using echoes and his clairvoyant vision, determined that all of these figures were wrong. This error wasn't due to any deviations from the original design after the Missouri's modernization. The original figures were flawed. The only thing that was correct was probably the ship's width. To facilitate transit through the Panama Canal, naval vessels were designed with the canal's standards in mind. Besides, unless someone personally took measurements aboard, the actual data would remain hidden in the shipyard's blueprints or in military databases. Henry knew this not because he wanted to make such information public or profit from it. He simply wanted to find something to do to pass the time. To put it bluntly, he had nothing better to do. Chapter 66 Mysterious Boss. As the world's most powerful film studio, Hollywood might not produce films at the same speed as Hong Kong's fast-paced productions, but it certainly wouldn't pull off something as bizarre as taking years to shoot a single film. Furthermore, filming on a battleship couldn't possibly continue indefinitely. As an active battleship, the Missouri had training missions and a regular maintenance schedule. Military missions, no matter what, wouldn't be appropriate when civilians were aboard. Yet, a significant portion of the film takes place on board the ship, with the exception of some explosion and destruction scenes shot on sets in a studio. One can imagine the tight filming schedule. Not only were the main actors incredibly busy, but even supporting actors like Henry could spend a full day filming. Sometimes they'd run down a hallway, only to run back down the other side for the next shot. Sometimes shots would only capture footsteps, sometimes full-body shots. If someone's positioning went wrong, the assistant director in charge of the interlude would call a no, requiring them to reset and run again, further consuming the film. And these were shots involving supporting actors, with minimal visual refinement. If the lighting wasn't right when the main actors appeared, the shot wouldn't look good, or even the slightest flaw would be grounds for an eng. All of this made Henry realize that truly big-budget productions pale in comparison to those petty, low-budget productions. Fortunately, Blackie's culinary team provided Henry, who had never been busier than he was, with plenty of solace. With a Le Cordon Bleu chef, Henry couldn't imagine how these Americans relaxed after get-off work. They still went to the bars outside the naval base and got drunk. If they had a headache, they'd take 2 ibuprofen. If that didn't stop, they'd increase their dosages of various leaves and rice, as if being clear-headed was an unforgivable sin. These Americans simply couldn't understand the idea of having a meal when they were upset, a meal to celebrate, a meal for holidays, a meal when they woke up in the middle of the night, and even a meal when they had nothing to do. During this time, the only people Blackie and Henry could talk to were each other. And Henry became the only actor, besides the main actors, to enjoy Blackie's special treatment. According to Blackie, if he didn't hone his culinary skills and explore new dishes, spending his days rolling dough, making donuts, or baking pizzas, he'd eventually become a useless member of this film production team. Then, next time, will you take a job like this that any kitchen helper could do, chef? Henry commandeered the kitchen griddle, frying a steak himself while questioning Blackie, who was pondering the ingredients. Don't be fooled by the seemingly ordinary hamburger patty on the griddle. It's the product of a recipe Blackie and Henry's days of painstaking research. Several high-quality cuts of beef are minced and blended, then specially seasoned. These supposedly affordable delicacies are, in reality, unaffordable to ordinary people, reserved only for the wealthy. Indeed, some wealthy individuals who consider themselves modest and reserved fall for this very approach. Even if the cost of ingredients qualifies them for a high-end French meal, they still prefer to use a simple exterior to embellish a luxurious interior. This is the complete opposite of the mentality of the nouveau riche, eager to flaunt their wealth. Black, standing nearby, had to tear his eyes away from the spices after hearing Henry's question. After a long struggle, he finally said, "Mad fake, I guess I'll take it." Henry was surprised. "Why? I thought you didn't like this mindless, mass-produced cooking. You're using your cooking skills like a factory machine. My mysterious boss really pays too much," Black said, resignedly. He added, "And how do you think 3-star Michelin-certified chefs make their money? That starred restaurant? Come on, how do they make their money?" Henry asked curiously. Black scoffed, "Selling recipes and meal kits, the stuff you say can be mass-produced. Without that kind of money to supplement their income, how many people can keep a losing restaurant going? You want atmosphere and quality service? You don't think maintaining that kind of shit is cheap, do you? Those who chase Michelin stars are just crazy, stupid people." Henry had seen such a statement in some food guides, so he made no comment. But what old Black said just now made him curious and asked, "Mysterious boss? Weren't you hired by a producer?" He was going to add a prefix like son of a bitch before producer. Considering that he was eating someone else's food, Henry was a little more reserved. Old Black looked proud. "The clientele I serve does not include anyone you see here. It is possible that someone could pull the ship here as a movie set." He pointed in the direction of the battleship outside. "Can you guess which pickled radish is not to be eaten?" Henry asked casually in a chatty manner. Old Black explained, "It's a pity that my work is arranged through a banquet company. They only tell me how much I'm paid, where to go, and what I want to eat, and that's all. They won't tell me who the boss is or who I'll be entertaining. You know, if these things are known in advance and leaked out, there will be a lot of trouble. So I'd rather not know. If you go there, you won't just see a group of people having dinner with those damn Venetian masks. How is that possible? There are some that kind of fun, but in most cases, I can meet the host of the dinner. Even if I didn't know beforehand, how could I not say hello when I meet? I know a lot of wealthy people." "Then what's the situation here?" Sighing, Lao He said, "To be honest, being assigned to a film production team like today is the first time in the world. And it's a long-term job. At first I thought it was a prank. After all, based on the level of my usual meals, let alone whether the ingredients are expensive, it's also a problem whether I can get enough to supply everyone. Even if those celebrities wanted to eat, they wouldn't have the patience to spend 2 or 3 hours on a single meal. Everyone's standards are the same, high-calorie, filling food. And it has to be quick, otherwise it delays filming and the producer or director will go crazy." Henry couldn't quite argue with Blackie's assessment, because the reality was exactly that. Seeing the steak almost done, Henry forked it onto the wire rack to drain. Instead of preparing a plate for himself, He rummaged through the pile of high-end ingredients marked prohibited, completely oblivious to whether Blackie felt sorry for him. Chapter 67 Junk Food. Henry found cream lettuce, kale, and tomato, and heated up some premium Parmesan cheese on the side. Finally, he pulled out a piece of white bread, about the size of his open hand, and cut it in half. Seeing this scene, Blackie looked constipated and said, "No, no, no, no. What are you doing with all this? This isn't what I had in mind." You guessed what I was thinking. You're insulting these ingredients," Blackie said in disapproval. But he didn't try to stop him. Henry smiled and said, "Look, I have a steak, 3 kinds of vegetables, cheese, and bread. Anyone who sees this will think it's a nutritionally balanced meal, right?" Blackie hesitated for a moment, then, with a slightly parted mouth, managed a forced, "Yes, that's right." He neatly piled the ingredients together, sandwiching the bread between them to form a burger. Henry held the burger and laughed. "But why does piling all these ingredients together make it junk food?" He wanted to argue, but Blackie couldn't find a way to start. He could only dwell on it, a sour look on his face. In reality, he was also wondering if this was worthy of being a dish. Rich people's cuisine, besides being delicious, is sometimes just a gimmick. It's that I have what others don't, and what they have is better. Don't offer this dish too often, just use it as a substitute or a tasting dish. This super premium burger is impeccable in every way. Ignoring black sprouting, Henry found a white porcelain plate, loaded his freshly prepared extra-large burger, and found a seat in the dining area. He didn't use a knife and fork. This thing was meant to be eaten with your hands to truly appreciate its flavor. But before he started, he felt like something was missing. Looking at the solitary burger, did he need a Coke and fries? Fries were fine, but what about without the Fat Nord's happy water? It was like watching a movie without the sound. The fun was gone in half. So Henry ran back to the bar and grabbed a can of Coca-Cola from the cooler. While there were other options like Pepsi and Fanta, at a time like this, it was still best to choose the cola with the best sperm-killing properties. Seeing Black's disdainful look, Henry shrugged, gently shaking the can in his hand, and said, "Without this, it feels like something's missing. It's like choosing between red and white wine with French cuisine. The right wine can elevate the meal to a higher level," Black said with disgust. "How can Coke compare to red wine? That's the biggest reason hamburgers are considered junk food, bar none. Carbonated drinks are simply non-addictive and their harmful effects don't show up quickly. But to be honest, you can drink them 3 times a day, and those brave enough should give it a try. You're guaranteed to be tormented by symptoms like diabetes and gout. But Henry's Kryptonian physique doesn't fear such things. If he has a medical condition, he can just soar high in the sky and bask in the sun, and all pain and discomfort will vanish instantly. This method worked reliably, and so far, he hadn't encountered a situation he couldn't solve. But before he could even return to his seat, Henry saw the massive burger he'd meticulously prepared was now in someone else's hands, with a small portion missing. Judging by the satisfied look on the man's face as he chewed, it was clear some dog had eaten the burger. Henry immediately unleashed a curse, a true American curse. "Fuck. Where did you come from? You bastard? You see food and just shove it in your mouth. Aren't you afraid I'd slap some man glue on it and watch you happily devour it? Fuck," the burger eater cursed, then stepped away from the food. But he reluctantly leaned forward, sniffed it carefully, and said, "I haven't tasted that thing, but I've smelled it. I'm sure it smells of rosemary, but not gardenia. So I assume you're just saying that to disgust me." With that, the man, holding the burger in both hands as if to protest, stared at Henry and took a vicious bite. Then he put on a lewd expression of enjoyment, just to piss off the person in front of him. Henry, as he'd hoped, exploded on the spot. He jumped up and down, saying, "Fuck. Fuck. That's my lunch, it tastes really good," the arrogant young man said, sucking the gravy from his fingers with an expression that looked like he deserved a beating. Henry's Kryptonian iron fist was rarely itching. They say killing one's parents is an unforgivable sin. Stealing someone's food is even worse. Always, adhering to the principle of being a sleazy person, Henry had carefully concealed his emotions to avoid losing control and exposing his abilities. He had never expected to encounter a young man today who would break his defenses. Not only did he want to beat him up, he even felt like eating him up. However, Henry exerted his utmost restraint, squinting his eyes at the young man before him and saying, "You're not from the production team, are you?" I haven't seen you here before. This reminded Henry of the young man he had seen before. A Caltech student? The one who's hanging out with the idiot who asked that stupid question? So this is the quality of students from a world-renowned university. Henry's question didn't bring back the same memory for the young man. He simply ate his burger nonchalantly, shoveling strands of hot cheese into his mouth, then back onto his burger. It's inappropriate to chase a celebrity and come to the set. Even if you're from a top university, I can call security and have you removed in a second. If you don't want to get kicked in the ass, I urge you to cooperate. You don't know who I am, the young man blurted out, a foolish remark that was like lighting the fuse on Henry's massive firecracker. Henry yelled, "Bullshit. Eat my big dick. Do you think you look like Franklin? Everyone in the world should know you." The young man, who had never been humiliated like this, was stunned. Even the burger in his mouth lost its flavor. He stared at the person in front of him in amazement, and then his mouth began to spit sweet words. "Although I don't look like that bald guy Franklin, I have enough Franklins, weighing several tons. Enough to crush you into a meat patty. Do you know how powerful I am? Huh, that's all the attack power," Henry sneered. "What if you have more Franklins? Will you share them with me?" The young man shook his head. "As a matter of course, I think so. Since you won't give them to me, it means it has nothing to do with me. Then why should I indulge you, a bastard? I don't get a penny from flattering you. I drank too much fake wine and thought you were my sugar daddy." Chapter 68 Master Stark. He wanted to continue his scolding, but his super hearing picked up the assistant director's voice, calling in random actors. Henry hurriedly grabbed a few donuts and stuffed them into his mouth. He gulped down another Coke, and with a simmering anger, he continued his work for the day. The young man, stunned by the scolding, had never felt so wronged in his life. But he wasn't discouraged or helpless. Instead, he was contemplating a retort. But before he could utter a word, his opponent had already run away. It was like a poker player who runs away after winning. He wanted to get up and chase him, but he couldn't bear to give up the cheeseburger he still had in his hand. "Hey, don't run away." It was then that he noticed a large, dark-skinned man in a chef's uniform nearby. Black was certainly not the worldly wise Henry. He knew who the young man, chowing down on his burger, was. He was just stunned by the scene. He hadn't expected his new friend to clash with this guy. It was not until Henry left in a hurry and most of the people in the dining area had left that he came to his senses and stepped forward to greet him. "Master Stark." Tony Stark did not reply. He just looked at the big black man who recognized him with some impatience. Old Black introduced himself. "Master, I am Wesley Washington, the head chef of the chef team you hired." "Oh, it's you. I remember you." Tony Stark raised the half-eaten food in his hand and said, "The burger is good. At least it proves that hiring you was the right decision." Old Black Wesley wiped the sweat from his forehead and said, "Well, Master, I have to be honest with you. This is a new recipe that I developed with a person just now. I am honored to add it to my cuisine, and you can enjoy it again in the future. But for what happened just now, can you please be magnanimous and forgive him this time? I will tell him about your identity so that he will know how to respect it and there will be no next offense." Old Black pleaded for Henry. At this point, if he still didn't know who the biggest name in the film production team was, it would be a waste for him to often see these rich people in the sky. Stark, a surname that Americans have been unable to avoid since World War II. Stark Industries products range from civilian projects to military projects. Although the types of products produced are not many, as long as they are made, they must be the best in the field. The key point. Howard Stark has a very good relationship with the U.S. military. As an off-staff scientist, he frequently appears in military research programs, sometimes as a leader, and sometimes as a consultant. With such a background, it is not difficult to pull out the battleship Missouri in service. Even if they need it, the aircraft carrier formation can be pulled out. Wesley certainly didn't want his new friend to offend this person to death, so he helped to plead. From this point of view, he can be regarded as a very loyal person. Instead of encountering danger, just thinking about being able to run faster than his companions. Tony Stark didn't answer directly. Instead, he asked, he just finished cursing and left. "What's going on? They must be getting ready for filming. Most of the actors like him have already left." "He's an actor too? A leading role? A supporting role?" Tony Stark only remembered who the film's heroine was and that the battleship Missouri was needed. He didn't care about anything else. Which is why he asked now. "Young Master Stark, Don't call me Master or Mr. Stark. It reminds me of another Stark. You can call me Tony," the young man, still in his rebellious phase, emphasized. "Okay, Tony. He's just a passing actor, not a leading role or a supporting role. It's really not worth your trouble." Old Black was interrupted again. Tony Stark said, chewing his burger, "This tastes really good. I suggest he be my personal chef." "Would he agree?" Wesley was stunned, then said, "I believe it would be an honor for Henry, but I don't think he would agree." "How do you know?" "Because I also tried to recruit him to be my assistant, and even help him start his own business. But Henry didn't agree." "Rejected?" "The salary you offered is too low. The first instinct of a child from a wealthy family is that the money is not enough." Lao He said, panicked, No. I give him a fixed salary of 150,000 yuan a year. If he goes out to work with me, there will be a separate bonus every time. This is much higher than his salary as a passerby actor." Of course, Tony Stark didn't understand that a $150,000 annual salary was more than 3 times the average American salary. He was simply recalling another incident, related to a few key words the man had uttered: Caltech, stupid questions, idiot. The last one, in particular, only reminded him of Justin Hammer. This wasn't to say he was the only idiot at Caltech. Rather, it was the only idiot Tony Stark remembered. These clues were enough for Tony Stark to recall the time in the library lounge area when Justin Hammer had used a question about the space shuttle's return to Earth to lure out a passerby who could calculate the answer at a glance. Having extraordinary computational abilities was nothing to Tony Stark, especially those students from the East, each one akin to a human calculator. But this person also had excellent cooking skills, suggesting a genius who hadn't given up on the finer points of life. That was good, much better than the incompetent genius with only one subject. And this person's job was to be a Hollywood actor. Wasn't that insane? Any one of these 3 traits alone wouldn't be worthy of Tony Stark's attention. But when all 3 are combined, it's undeniable that, with Tony's vast knowledge, he'd be interested in such a patient. He'd want to dissect their brains, to see where the knots and kinks are. Why does that guy insist on being an actor when there are better jobs? Does he really want to be a star so badly? Tony Stark asked. Meanwhile, he wondered what he could do to convince him to become a star. Black knew what Henry was thinking. He said, "I asked him, and he doesn't want to be famous. He just came to Hollywood to see the world because he loves Audrey Hepburn. Maybe he'll get tired of her and look for something else." "Oh, when he gets tired of her," Tony Stark repeated playfully. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 69 Expulsion. "I'm sorry to tell you this, Henry," these were the first words the Kryptonian, having traveled to this world, heard upon coming face to face with a star. Steven Seagal stood before Henry with a stern expression and said, "We are aware of the conflict in the dining area yesterday. Regardless of the circumstances, you did use rude language, although Mr. Stark didn't request it. The other producers believe that keeping you on board would be detrimental to the film's production. After all, borrowing the battleship Missouri as a filming location wouldn't have been possible without Mr. Stark's assistance. Any further conflict would be detrimental to everyone. You can agree on that, don't you, Mr. Stark?" Madfuck. Henry, bewildered, instantly understood the whole story. In this world, in America, only 2 Starks are held in such high regard. One is Howard Stark, the brilliant scientist and entrepreneur active since World War II. The other, of course, is Tony Stark, the future owner of Stark Industries. So, judging by age, the jerk who stole his burger yesterday was Tony Stark. Then he gave him a good scolding. Really, not unfair. With that kind of character, he didn't even treat him to a Kryptonian iron fist. He was truly blessed by the protagonist's luck. After thinking it through, Henry said seriously, "I understand, Mr. Seagal. So, what do we do now?" Steven Seagal produced a check and said, "Your employment ends today. This is your previous paycheck. If there's anything wrong with the numbers, you can talk to the finance department." Henry accepted the check without hesitation. His position within the production team was that of a disposable, sideline actor. Insisting on staying and using the contract as an excuse would only embarrass everyone. Seeing his man so understanding, Steven Seagal felt relieved. He shook Henry's hand and said, "I'm sorry we have to handle this. I'm actually very optimistic about you. Your fight scenes with me are better than anyone else's. I was thinking about signing you to my exclusive team, but what happened today is unfortunate. I hope we'll have another chance to work together again." Henry said, "Thank you, Mr. Seagull." Whether it was a courtesy or a sincere one, big stars are always busier than the rest of us. Steven Seagal finished his words and left first. As for Henry, there would naturally be someone to watch him leave and make sure he didn't cause any trouble. After changing out of his villain costume in the dressing room, Henry, dressed lightly, prepared to leave. As he passed the dining area, he saw Chef Black directing the cleanup after breakfast. Henry thought of saying hello before leaving. Henry said to the two security guards following him, "Hey, guys. I'm going to chat with Chef for a few minutes, then I'll go back to the restaurant to pack up and leave. Is that okay?" The two burly men had also smoked with Henry before. They exchanged a glance and said, "Brother, don't stay too long. The heroine doesn't have scenes this morning, so you and that guy probably won't run into each other again. You have to promise not to cause any trouble, so we'll be acceptable to the producers. Promise not to cause any trouble." Henry swore on his heart. As for the hints from the two security guards, they were obvious enough. No matter whether the heroine had no role in the morning or was arranged on short notice, it was always related to that young man. But this was not something Henry could worry about. Henry went over and gave the black chef a fist bump. The old black man, whose racial talent was to speak with a rap rhythm, said enthusiastically, "Why didn't I see you come to breakfast this morning?" "Brother, I went to meet the big star, Mr. Steven Seagal," Henry said honestly. Logically speaking, this should be a good thing, but the old black man noticed something wrong from Henry's face, which didn't smile much. He asked, "Brother, what's wrong?" Taking out a check from his pocket and shaking it, Henry said, "My work ends today. I don't need to come starting tomorrow." "How can they do this? Why not?" "The termination clause in the contract is to be used when needed," Henry said with a very open mind. He patted the check in his chest pocket again and said, "And the other party followed the rules and didn't deduct a penny. Even if I wanted to cause trouble, I wouldn't have any reason to." Henry remembered the contents of the contract clearly. His daily salary, plus the compensation for the crew's voluntary termination, was exactly the same as the amount on the check. There was no fault to be found. So he wanted to discuss why, but Black suddenly widened his eyes and said, "Could it be because of what happened yesterday?" "Yes, it's because I offended the young master of the Stark family. You know who that person is." "I just found out," Henry said innocently. "But I pleaded for you yesterday, and Mr. Stark agreed not to pursue the matter." "Is there some misunderstanding here?" Black complained. At first, he was surprised by Black's righteousness, and then he was angry at Tony Stark for not keeping his word. But a little thought told him that this might not be the case. Henry said, "It's probably not that young master who took the initiative to pursue the matter. Otherwise, he would have come forward personally and humiliated me, and that would have made him feel better. But when I met with Mr. Sieg, he was just being businesslike and outwardly polite." "What's going on?" "I guess the producers didn't want me to clash with that young master again, so they asked me to leave. If it was the young master from the Stark family who borrowed a boat, then he's certainly important. In comparison, I'm insignificant." Chef Wesley certainly understood that what Henry said was absolutely right. Those who are powerful do not need to tell others what to do in order for things to go on. Instead, there will naturally be people around them who will understand their intentions and then take initiative. Then they just need to choose an appropriate time to speak out about their actions. Although they may not necessarily gain the gratitude of these powerful people, as long as they can be remembered, it is a big step forward. Although Lao He knows many wealthy people through catering, it is just an acquaintance. He understands these people's thoughts better than ordinary people, but he can't change anything. In contrast, Henry was thinking about something else. The man yesterday was the first superhero he had met since he came to this world, a human body before he became a superhero. But the other party didn't look like the actor in his memory at all. Henry asked casually, "Chef, do you know Robert Downey Jr.? Chapter 70 The Difference Between Reality and Memory. Are you talking about the little star in Chaplin and his lovers? I heard that guy has a celebrity dad, so he must be pretty famous in your circle." "Why are you asking about me? You know him?" Henry exclaimed in surprise. "Well, I went to see it because I wanted to know who Hollywood is casting to portray the actresses of the Golden Age. Honestly, It was quite disappointing. But Chaplin's acting is pretty good, I can still tell. So, do you think Robert Downey Jr. and Tony Stark look alike? Old Black suddenly widened his bill-like eyes, lowered his voice, and leaned in to ask, why? Do you have a rumor that those two are half-brothers or something? No, I don't have that. I just wanted to ask, do you think there are any similarities in their looks or temperament? After a long pause, Old Black said, no, I don't think they are at all. Especially when you put them together, that young man from a celebrity family wouldn't be able to be proud next to the heir to Stark Industries. Old Black's answer gave Henry a warning. It seems I can't use facial recognition to determine if someone is the real superhero. Actors are actors, and superheroes are superheroes, they're each independent entities. And considering the tradition of American comics relying on the original, perhaps what I know isn't reliable. Who knows what's really going on Earth in this universe? For example, is SHIELD's one-eyed director black or white? Is Tony Stark Howard Stark's biological son? Will he become Iron Man or the Sorcerer Supreme? Will Captain America, rescued from the Arctic, wake up and yell "Hail Hydra"? There's no need to even ask if this is the famous Marvel Cinematic Universe. After all, mutants running around everywhere isn't something you'd expect from a cinematic universe. And besides the Marvel Universe, are there any other strange things here? Regarding the last question, Henry can guarantee there are definitely some. Because he's the weirdest person in this universe, a Kryptonian who doesn't even know if the Marvel Universe even exists. The biggest after effect of this incident was that when intelligence agents appeared around him, Henry couldn't identify them by face unless they revealed a flaw. Like that SHIELD agent with a shiny forehead, or that bald South American agent from S.H.I.E.L.D. who, despite having high authority, was being ordered around like a thug. The thought of this made Henry's head spin. He reaffirmed his principle of avoiding unnecessary risk. Don't run into an African-American actor in Hollywood who keeps saying mad fake and then, as if on a whim, assume they're SHIELD jerk. That would be hilarious. Perhaps it was Henry's silence during his reflection that made Blackie feel a little uneasy, even if it was only for a short while. Chef Wesley said, "Boy, do you want me to intercede for you with Tony Stark?" Henry was surprised at first, then smiled and shook his head, saying, "Thanks, Chef. But I don't think so. This is just a job, and there's no crew that can shoot forever. If it ends early, I'll just find the next one early. It's no big deal. And you already said that Tony Stark promised not to pursue it, so I also believe that he has no interest in pursuing a small person like me. It was other people who wanted to curry favor with me who fired me, so it's not appropriate to ask him to intercede. Besides, Henry didn't think that Blackie had enough face to make those rich people willing to listen to his request. Don't let things go wrong, Blackie lose face, and can't vent his anger on those people, but instead blame Henry for being careless. Then we won't even be friends anymore." After the conversation, Henry stood up and prepared to leave. At this time, Blackie smiled shamelessly and said, "Brother, what about the recipe for that hamburger?" Henry said generously, "Use it if you want, and publish it under your name if you want. Anyway, you did participate in the research and development, and the ingredients were all provided by you. I ate so many meals of yours for free, it's enough. Hey, brother, thanks. You have my phone number. If you don't want to be an actor and want to find a job, just come to me. The treatment I promise to give you will only be better, not worse. Thanks." Henry shook hands with the old black man, who was almost twice his size, and after a few pats on the back, he left. That was the fun of working in Hollywood, there were always new friends and goodbyes. The breath of summer had quietly arrived in California. Driving his second-hand Cadillac, Henry had to roll down the windows to let in the cool breeze in order to feel just the right amount of comfort. They drove north. Although he was fired from the crew, Henry still stayed in San Diego for nearly a month. San Diego was not far from Los Angeles, and it took about 2 hours to drive there. Henry was not in a hurry at all, and just drove leisurely on the highway. Being unexpectedly fired did not bring Henry much regret. The next time he encountered someone who stole his food, whether it was Stark or Doom, he would beat him up without hesitation. Taking stock of what he had gained from the crew, apart from the praise from Steven Seagal, which was probably just a polite gesture, the invitations from several other action teams were real. Of course, they didn't extend the olive branch until the last day. Someone had already approached Henry and tried to recruit him before then. These action teams seemed more reliable than Channing's. However, Henry declined, not agreeing to join anyone's team. Perhaps after today, the owners of these teams will be thankful that the person didn't agree in the first place. Otherwise, if Master Stark took his anger out on them, what would they, with their small stature, do? Presumptuously speculating about others' thoughts, Henry played out various little dramas in his mind. He whistled as he drove towards Los Angeles. Back in Hollywood, he happened to stop by Aunt Cesaria's Italian restaurant for a meal. Henry loved coming here. He didn't know if the Italian food was authentic, but it was delicious. And every time he came, he could practice his Italian in various ways. For example, he practiced Italian pickup techniques with Aunt Cesaria's husband and then used them on Aunt Cesaria. This seemingly magical thing actually happened in the restaurant. The Italian couple didn't seem to mind, instead finding it amusing. At least when Henry complimented Aunt Cesaria on her beauty or cooking, the uncle always looked proud. It's fair to say that Henry still needs to learn the ropes of Italian romance. Chapter 71: A Different Job Invitation. He wandered over to the Screen Actors Guild again, ready to flirt with Marion with his newly learned tactics and check for any new job postings. But the clerk who usually sat behind the counter had disappeared today, replaced by a middle-aged man wearing square glasses. Not wanting to flirt with the old man, Henry dropped his gun and nodded silently as a greeting. He couldn't tell whether it was disappointment or expectation. There were no new available jobs listed on the notice board, and no auditions from the guild. Anyway, another day of coming home empty-handed. He'd joined the production team of Devil Warrior to add a nice touch to his resume. But getting fired midway, that didn't seem like a good idea. Should he include this experience on his actor profile? Henry wondered. He bought some dinner ingredients and, not wanting to check in at the library, returned early to his long-missed apartment. It hadn't been completely unoccupied for nearly a month. Henry would still come back when the film crew had a break, so the house hadn't been covered in dust for a month. Using his super speed, Henry quickly cleaned the house. He then put all the newly bought items that needed to be refrigerated or frozen into the refrigerator. He also grabbed a can of beer. Actually, Henry wouldn't get drunk from drinking, he just wanted something cold. The lukewarm water theory be damned. Oddball water was an option, but some of the country brands were even more expensive than Coke or bottled water. So American. And after Henry's analysis, he realized there wasn't any advanced technology involved in beer. The only reason it was so cheap and not a national hit was because it was bitter. In short, Henry had to choose between the cloyingly sweet happy water and the bitter, chilling beer, or drink water from the tap. It wasn't that the tap water wasn't good enough that Henry didn't drink it often. It was simply that the pipes in the apartment were old, and the water always had a rusty smell. For a Kryptonian with a super sense of taste, this was a bit of a torture. Maybe I should buy a water purifier, or make one myself. Henry thought so. Just when he was about to find a record to play, immersing his body and soul in music, and living the life of a Kryptonian, he didn't expect the phone to ring first. Hello, a voice came from the phone. Hey, Henry, brother, I heard you got into big trouble, Channing? Mad fake, did the news spread so fast? I just got back from San Diego this morning, this is Hollywood. Those gossip tabloid reporters don't have as much information as people in the circle, the head of the action team he had worked with said proudly on the phone. What? Is there talk in the industry of a coordinated effort to ban me? There are rumors. After all, the mess you've caused is so huge. But the real boss hasn't asked for anything, which has left everyone at a loss as to how to proceed. Oh, why didn't they consider that if they killed the wrong person, they wouldn't let him go? They just wiped me out, clean and easy. You don't know that. People in Hollywood have always been unsure of the Stark family's intentions. There have been many times when they thought they had a hint, only to be ridiculed by the family. A Stark, this was what Henry was curious about. Tony Stark was still in college. Henry didn't realize he was actually pursuing a doctorate, unless he'd already been stalking Hollywood women before he'd even grown enough hair. There wouldn't be any legend left behind. So the one person who would terrify Hollywood was Howard Stark. According to the information he'd gathered before his time travel, Howard Stark's design was based on the real American tycoon Howard Hughes. This man was a renowned business tycoon, pilot, aeronautical engineer, philanthropist, and film producer. He even ran RKO, one of the 8 major film studios of the 1930s. He was a true Hollywood darling. This meant that this world's Howard Stark actually had a similar background to Howard Hughes. As if to confirm Henry's suspicions, Channing said over the phone, "You don't think Stark Industries has no connection to Hollywood, do you? The finest photographic equipment is still produced by Stark Industries. The latest technology also originated there. The previous generation, Mr. Stark, not only produced and photographed films, he even starred in cameos in his own films. That's not to mention the countless beauties of the Golden Age who became part of his rumored roster." Old Stark played riotously, and young Stark followed suit. Father and son were biological, so there was no doubt about it. "Well, all the Starks are eccentrics," Henry came to a conclusion. He added, "Then Channing, you called me today. Are you here to laugh at me? The matter has been spread like this. It doesn't matter what the truth is." "Hey, brother, of course not. It's very simple to solve your problem. Just go and apologize to Tony Stark, bow your head, and the other party won't say anything, and the matter will be over." "You wouldn't even be willing to do that." "Should I agree?" Henry pondered. Supposedly, to demonstrate Kryptonian integrity, Tony Stark wanted to see his Ford after he bowed, only if you were to headbutt him. But that wasn't how things worked in the real world. With over a decade of experience as a slave before his time travel, bowing his head wouldn't kill him. It had nothing to do with whether he was a Kryptonian in this lifetime. Henry was concerned that Iron Man might not have been a popular, top-tier character in the original comics, but in the early days of the film world, he was a well-deserved protagonist. Would approaching such a person go against his principle of humble development? Before considering these things, Henry asked curiously, "Channing, are you saying you can arrange a meeting between me and Tony Stark? Otherwise, how am I supposed to bow my head and apologize to him?" "Brother, don't be ridiculous. How could I possibly arrange such a thing? You think too highly of me. I just happen to have an opportunity." "What opportunity?" Channing said seriously. "My team members occasionally act as reception staff or bodyguards at banquets. I just happen to get another job, and it's mainly for wealthy Caltech students and their Silicon Valley alumni. And then there's going to be some celebrity stars and models. Tony Stark's very likely in attendance. Why don't you join as a receptionist and take advantage of this opportunity?" "Such an opportunity?" Henry drawled, his reluctance evident. "Okay, I'll be honest. I'm a little short on manpower, so consider it a favor. It's not tiring work, there are beautiful women to look at, and you can even sneak in some drinks." Chapter 72 Rich Man's Party. In the end, Henry agreed to Channing's request and joined the banquet staff. His reasoning was simple: no matter how hard he tried, he wouldn't necessarily make it to a banquet of this caliber, so he might as well become a staff member and see the world. Secondly, he wanted to repay Channing a favor. While he had helped the production team with a previous stunt sequence, it was Channing's recommendation that earned him the opportunity. This time, he was in trouble again, and Channing, a Hollywood veteran, called to offer Henry guidance and a chance to resolve the situation. Whether he needed it or not. If he truly didn't need this kind of forced favor, he would have just turned it down. But in this situation, it was optional, so Henry simply chose to accept it. So, here he was, dressed in a rented black suit, standing at the corner of a manor house's swimming pool, playing the role of an emotionless bodyguard. The reason he didn't work as a receptionist was because the male receptionist's uniform was a white sleeveless shirt with a black bow tie, topped with shorts and suspenders, then topped with tweed socks and black leather shoes. The overall look was so striking that even a Kryptonian wouldn't be able to resist. Even though the receptionist's salary was higher, Henry still passed on the offer. It wasn't a question of money, it was a matter of awareness. Unfortunately, Henry didn't have that. No one knew who owned the villa. It was rented by a banquet company specifically for parties. Food and drinks were a given. The receptionist's job was essentially to carry plates around the party venue, collect empty glasses, and serve food and drinks. Balloons, streamers, firecrackers, and other party items were everywhere, ready for anyone to use. The DJ mixer and speakers were set up in the main area, next to the pool. The music was the nascent electronic dance music of the era, stimulating the nerves like a psychotropic. Most surprising of all, there was a smoking area inside. Regular cigarette smokers wouldn't enter, even without the special supplies. Those who entered this area would be intoxicated by the air's permeating aroma, entering a similarly trance-like state. There were quite a few people at the party. To tell who were invited guests, who were staff from the banquet company, or who were even the playmates providing special services, one had to look at their attire. Those wearing bizarre outfits, like bunny girls and cowboys, were almost always receptionists or playmates. Those wearing dapper black suits, like Henry, were bodyguards hired for show. While the invited guests were not wealthy, they were either college students or Silicon Valley upstarts. Therefore, their attire was quite casual, mostly t-shirts and sweatpants, effortlessly casual. But don't assume their casual attire meant they were all cheap. Based on Henry's recent understanding of fashion, each of them was wearing clothing worth thousands of taels. 2 bikini-clad beauties were also lounging on 2 floating mats in the pool. They were also part of the playmates. Sometimes, some crazy people would just jump into the pool, shirtless, creating a huge splash that made the 2 beauties giggle. If a bikini-clad beauty was invited upstairs by a guest for a deeper conversation, someone else would take her place. The goal was to ensure the scenery was pleasurable and the selection of toys was plentiful. For Henry, it was truly a surprise. This party was like a human flesh market, only missing the weight-for-weight system. He'd never seen such extravagant scenes in his previous life. More importantly, this wasn't even a top-notch human flesh party. It was just a run-of-the-mill Hollywood banquet company that needed the support of Channing's team. Even an outsider like Henry could easily join, demonstrating the lack of any regard for confidentiality. A party like this, where secrecy was unnecessary, couldn't be much higher. Henry had no desire to defend the parents of the girls or boys who had worked so hard to raise their children, even if they were treated rudely or impolitely. If he really wanted to be noble, he should have just walked away instead of standing by and criticizing. So Henry simply put on his sunglasses, feigning indifference, and watched everything with a cold eye. The main function of party bodyguards like them wasn't to protect anyone. It was to calm people down when they got too drunk. It wasn't that they'd hurt the girls or boys, but that they'd turn their anger on the other invited guests. Then, when someone was too drunk to care for themselves, they'd find an empty bed or sofa and throw them there to rest. They wouldn't let them fall asleep and suffocate, or drown in their own vomit. After all, this place was mostly young, and they were more likely to overdo it, getting themselves killed or causing death. The bodyguard's job was to make sure anyone seeking death didn't die at the party, so that others wouldn't get into trouble. At times like these, Henry felt a little annoyed at the sheer power of his super senses. The entire villa was within his reach. In particular, a recent attempt to map a battleship's structure using the echoes of knocks on its hull had taught Henry's brain the ability to construct spatial images from sound. Perhaps the only physical information left was color, which required direct optic nerve reception and couldn't be indirectly observed with his current abilities. Henry was crystal clear about everything else. He wished his superpowers had a switch to turn them off, but unfortunately, he could only distract himself from unpleasant things. But now, working as a bodyguard meant, to put it bluntly, standing still and daydreaming. Henry hadn't trained his brain to the point where he could stand still and let his mind wander. So, he was tormented by everything happening in the villa. If it weren't for Channing's favor, and if he hadn't waited for Tony Stark to show some support and resolve his problems, Henry would have left long ago. So, the question was, would the eldest son of the Stark family actually come to the party? Despite Channing's emphasis on Tony Stark's name on the invitation list, Henry would have left long ago. Being invited and attending are 2 different things. Henry has heard many times that a bunch of important people were invited to a certain party, but in the end, all they showed up were a bunch of idiots. He was thinking about whether to stare at the girls' lips and study their lipstick colors to divert his attention. An uninvited guest came in front of Henry and snapped his fingers. Thanks to book friends 20220821220609814, book friends 20220822232919217, book friends 20170611214225462, book friends 20200721111325413. Reader 1489560868730462208, Xingwu, Koei TW for the rewards. Chapter 73 Enemies meet on a narrow road. Hey, men, I know you, the man who snapped his fingers said to Henry. Not content with just words, he reached out and removed Henry's sunglasses to confirm the appearance of this bodyguard. Being treated so rudely, Henry couldn't help but see who it was. Though he didn't know the name, Henry recognized it as the college student who had quizzed him with the same rudeness in the Caltech library lounge. Maybe a master's or doctoral student. Who knows, they didn't wear name tags. Looking back at the scene, anyone who could confront Tony Stark face to face couldn't be of low status. At the time, they were just strangers, so Henry readily confronted him. But now, their enemies had met again. As an employee at the banquet, he certainly couldn't be rude to an invited guest. Henry still had some professional ethics. So he could only play dumb and say, "What can I do for you, sir?" Justin Hammer, surrounded by women, continued snapping his fingers in front of the others with his free hand, saying, "Hey, men, don't pretend you don't know me. I remember you, and I remember you very clearly. You're not that great. Anyone with a brain can solve any problem with just one look. So why are you standing here today? Oh, I see. You're short of money, right? There could be other reasons. Oh my God, this guy, who knows who he is? Is he proud of holding a grudge? Otherwise, why would he emphasize it and remember it so clearly?" Henry's inner monologue was well restrained and he didn't say it out loud. He just tried to divert his attention, not looking at the rich young man in front of him, so as not to make his fists itch. Justin Hammer, completely unaware of the danger of his own situation, was still desperately provoking the Kryptonian who was desperately swallowing his anger. A small fat guy in a sports jacket and a baseball cap with his head tilted noticed the situation here. He immediately left the girl beside him and walked over. He said, "Hey, Justin, what's going on here?" "No, I just saw a guy I know." "You know this guy is a genius. He can give an answer to any question just by looking at it." "Oh, really?" The small fat guy turned to Henry and said, "Hey, brother, then why are you doing this kind of work here? Come to my company, I'll give you an annual salary of 100,000. If you perform well, you can even get a raise." Justin pushed the fat guy in dissatisfaction and said, "Hey, what the hell? Do you know what this guy did? He humiliated me. Now you want to give him a job? Well, I think a job that only pays 100,000 is a humiliation. Fuck. Are you serious?" "Yeah, are you serious?" Henry's inner thoughts were the same as those of the man named Justin, although the two of them might not have the same points to complain about. But this little fat man is also a man who does great things, and he understands the difference in importance between people. Or rather, from the very beginning, he has been on the side of the man named Justin. He took out a mobile phone produced in 1990, full of the sense of the times, from his jacket, Nokia Cityman 190. In this era when bulky portable phones are dominated by Black King Kong, the shape of this Nokia is quite in line with the fashion sense of urban people. But the fat man didn't feel sorry at all, and threw it back. With a splash, the phone was thrown into the swimming pool. The fat man said with an exaggerated expression of surprise, "Oh, no, the thing fell into the water. Please, sir, help me pick it up. That's an electronic product, and it will be damaged if it is soaked in water. If you rescue it quickly, maybe it can be saved." Although he really wanted to punch the fat man in the face and turn his fat face into a sunken bun face. But Henry found out with regret that according to the instructions before work, helping guests to retrieve things that accidentally fell into the swimming pool was indeed within his job scope. Although the manager added that generally speaking, guests would not be so careless. And most of the time, such situations were just playful interactions between guests, and they would pick up the things that fell into the water by themselves. The bodyguards should be careful not to let the guests drown in it. If someone really couldn't pick it up, they still had to help instead of just sitting back and doing nothing. This was just in case. Henry wanted to ask, what should he do now that this job responsibility was being abused? Waiting online, urgent. Without taking any action immediately, Henry just maintained his initial expressionless look and looked at the fat man who was suspected to be the host of the party. The fat man, who was dressed like a street black man, pretended to be cruel and said, "What are you looking at? Why don't you pick up the things? If it really breaks, I will make you compensate for it. Or do you want me to say that magic gourd? Please. Is this okay?" This suit was rented. If it got soaked in water, in addition to paying for the expensive cleaning fee, it would be the same as buying it forever. It can be said that entering the swimming pool is a major decision. But Henry still chose to go into the water. Without making any objections, he walked around the people blocking his way with an expressionless face and stood by the pool. He took a straight step and fell straight into the pool. The pool was not deep. When an adult stood up, the water was almost up to the waist. In this kind of pool, swimming is fine, but diving is not. So Henry didn't think about playing too fancy, but just walked over to the place where the phone was soaked. Then he bent down and entered the water, and fished out the expensive Nokia from the bottom of the pool. Of course, the whole suit was soaked in water. Even his head was a mess. This was because he could confirm the location of the phone at the bottom of the pool, so he didn't have to hold his breath and dive into the water to grope for a long time. The fat man laughed at the pool and said, "That's right, wouldn't it have been better to do this earlier?" Seeing the satisfied look on the face of the person he wanted to flatter, the little fat man said, "Justin, if you still want to teach him a lesson, take my advice and send him directly to the island." "What island?" Justin was puzzled at first, then said, "Could it be the rumored orgy island? That big guy is not suitable for it." "Hey, there are more than just entertainment activities on the island. It's just that I can't say too many details outside." During these conversations, both of them thought they had lowered their voices so that people far away in the swimming pool could not hear them. Little did they know that Henry had already focused his attention on them and heard every word clearly. So when Henry picked up the phone and stood up from the pool, he did not immediately climb up the escalator beside the swimming pool. Instead, he shook the phone at the little fat man and then threw it over the wall. "Oh, sorry, my hand slipped." Henry frowned, pouted, spread his hands, and made a helpless expression. Chapter 74 Latecomers. Henry paid no mind to the chubby man's tantrums by the pool. He exited the pool via the other side's metal ladder. He then shed his soaked suit jacket, slinging it over his shoulder with one hand. He loosened his tie with the other and sauntered toward the villa's main entrance. The chubby man stopped him, saying, "Mad fake, go pick up my cell phone, or I'll fire you." "Oh, sir, no need to bother. I'm quitting. You can save me the trouble of firing me and get a cell phone in return." Honestly, considering Henry's knowledge of electronics, trading his suit for a cell phone was a steal. So, Henry didn't want to stay and argue, and simply pulled the chubby man away. He was holding back, otherwise, if he had pushed harder, the chubby man would have been stuck to the wall, a patty. Interestingly, the receptionists and security guards, also assigned by the banquet company, acted oblivious to what was happening. This was, in fact, the banquet company's instructions. If a conflict occurs, avoid injury and simply leave, everything will be handled easily later. But if someone is assaulted, the situation becomes completely different. Those bodyguards' failure to intervene would be dereliction of duty. This suggests the banquet company knows the nature of these wealthy individuals. They must have a standard procedure in place. Otherwise, wouldn't they be annoyed by the constant drama of boss versus special forces bodyguard? But when Henry reached the villa's front yard, the door opened and a flashy red Ferrari was ushered in, right in front of Henry. The man who emerged from the car was none other than Tony Stark, one of Henry's targets. He casually tossed him a set of keys and said, "Park my car." "Oh, it's you." Recognizing him, Henry tossed the keys back without a word, then said, "How did you recognize me as a parking attendant? Do you want a new set of seat cushions?" "Oh, you look like shit." Henry's clothes were dripping with water even without being wrung out. So Tony Stark's perception was spot on. "So, don't even think about ordering this piece of shit over to your leather seats. Unless you really want to change, in which case I'd be happy to help you make up your mind." Having said that, Henry didn't even bother to apologize to Tony Stark, who finally appeared. The people inside were either rich or powerful, and he'd offended them. It was probably fate. Whether or not young Master Stark was missing didn't seem to matter. Hollywood was truly going to fail. If I couldn't make it here, I'd find another place. A Kryptonian like me couldn't die from holding my piss. So, Henry had to bypass that flashy Ferrari and leave this damn villa. But this time, his exit wasn't going smoothly either. The closing gate was knocked open by a car, which stopped in a position that blocked the Ferrari's movement. Two gunmen got out of the car, one of whom held a gun to Henry's head. "No one is leaving," the other one said, naturally, to restrain Tony Stark. Henry wasn't trying to be a hero. Even though his iron body should be able to stop bullets, to be honest, he hadn't really proven it. So, Henry didn't want to experiment with it at this moment. He just raised his hands in surrender. "Say, where's Josh Hilton?" the gunman restraining Henry asked. "Who's Josh Hilton?" Henry asked innocently. Actually, the name was on the guest list he'd seen. But the list didn't come with a photo, and Henry couldn't connect the names he'd seen with someone he didn't know. Incidentally, while reviewing the list, Henry noticed that there was only one person named Justin Hammer. Is that the Justin Hammer he remembered? The clown-like boss of Hammer Industries in the Iron Man movies. But this guy didn't look like the actor he remembered, Sam Rockaway, and certainly didn't look the same as the 60 or 70-year-old from the comics. So, trying to identify people by face wasn't going to work. Henry, slightly disappointed, glanced at Tony Stark again, hoping to find some resemblance to Robert Downey Jr. He saw nothing, but was horrified. This young man didn't care about the threat posed by the gun. Or perhaps it was the man holding the gun who was too careless, closing the distance between them to within arm's reach. With a simple block, Tony Stark removed the threatening gun. With a powerful flick of his hand, the weapon fell to the ground. Seeing this, the gunman watching Henry moved his gun away, ready to shoot anyone who dared to resist. Henry had no choice but to act. Not only could he not let Tony Stark get shot, but he couldn't expect these two men to be kind enough to spare the other man after subduing the resistor, even if Henry clearly surrendered. It was just a matter of one bullet. These two assassins might not have much experience, but they had no problem with the idea of shooting and killing. They say a gun is fast at 7 paces, but it's also fast and accurate at 7 paces. But if someone dares to move the gun away at face-to-face distance, forget about speed or accuracy. Check your head first. So, quick-witted Henry grabbed the gun and steered it. Then, with just the right amount of force, he delivered a punch across his opponent's jaw, sending his eyes rolling back and knocking him unconscious. The unconscious gunman collapsed, and Henry's weapon naturally fell into his hands. Meanwhile, Tony Stark was engaged in a fistfight with his opponent, their passionate, flesh-and-flesh exchange embarrassing for the onlookers. Why is WWE wrestling so thrilling? It's because of that theatricality that makes both the attacker and the defender engaging. But watching two strangers exchange punches back and forth was nothing but embarrassment. Still, it was clear that Tony Stark had a boxing background. It was just that after a few blows, his opponent abandoned his boxing routine and fought back, desperately trying to catch Tony. Without a heavyweight fist that could knock out his opponent with one punch, Tony Stark could only fight his opponent relentlessly. But Tony Stark's genius brain allowed him to be aware of everything other than his opponent. Of course, he noticed that Henry had cleanly dealt with his opponent and even got a gun. "Fuck, what are you doing standing there? Shoot him," Tony shouted. But this shout failed to scare his opponent. This big guy who came out of nowhere seemed to be determined and just wanted to control the young man in front of him as soon as possible. Henry didn't hear Tony Stark shouting to shoot, so he really shot. He pretended to take aim, pretending that he couldn't aim at the unknown killer from the two people who were moving and changing positions. Chapter 75 Large-Scale Attack. Removing the gun, Henry said, "You really want me to shoot? I'm not sure who I'll hit." His selfish motive was to inflict more pain on Tony Stark. Those two guys' punches weren't lethal anyway. "Fuck," Tony cursed in the front, followed by the killer's roar. But if there were only these two opponents, and Henry managed to take down one of them, the audience might have watched the show forever. If Tony Stark's rascally face took a punch, Henry might even raise his hands and cheer. However, the Kryptonian, previously infuriated by the fat man's provocation and oblivious to the surroundings, regained his super senses. Henry noticed a number of people closing in on the villa complex. The closest ones were already close to the wall, preparing to scale it. And from the airflow, the movements they simulated, many of them were already holding rifles or pistols. These people weren't tabloid paparazzi, offering only the possibility of social demise. Henry didn't think the guns they held were limited to firing BBs or paintballs. Even at the gate behind him, two cars were speeding towards him. Henry didn't want to gamble on whether they were his own or the killer's. So, with a single shot, he dispatched Tony Stark's opponent. The man was perfectly poised to lunge, and even Tony's repeated punches to the face didn't change his direction, effectively knocking Tony to the ground. Unfortunately, Henry's shot to the chest sent him into shock, preventing him from truly securing Tony Stark. The shot, aimed at a small artery in the lungs, would have caused massive bleeding. With prompt medical attention, there was a chance of survival. However, left unattended, he would have bled to death. Henry, a man well versed in medical texts, had carefully chosen a target. In short, the unconscious killer was like an 80 or 90 kilogram sack of potatoes crushing Tony Stark. The pressure made the young man groan, and he managed to utter, "Fuck." Henry circled to the other side of the car, just as Tony pushed the man off him. Seeing the bloodied face of the young man, Henry asked, "Didn't that gunshot hit you, you damn bastard? I'd rather you shot me than have to be on top of this fat pig," Tony Stark said angrily. Just as he finally freed himself and stood up, about to continue his scolding of Henry, 2 more cars barreled through the gate. The roar of their engines told everyone present that this was no time for flirting. Henry, unconcerned with Tony Stark's character, pressed him down by the scruff of the neck and ran back into the villa. Since his route was convenient, Tony easily scooped up the pistol he had fired. He didn't run towards the pool to alert the others because someone shouting loudly in the open air made a perfect target. Henry didn't want to test his iron body's bulletproofness in public. So he avoided the pool and headed straight inside. As soon as he ducked behind a marble cabinet, he heard gunshots from all directions. No matter how reckless Tony Stark was, he wouldn't have considered charging out with just a small pistol. Tony Stark lowered his voice and said, "I remember there should be security at a party like this. Shouldn't they have stepped in to handle the situation?" Henry scoffed. "The banquet company doesn't allow us to bring any firearms. Do you think it's a good idea to let those high-energy, wealthy young men get their hands on weapons? They have even less self-control than Nico. If they just killed someone insignificant, it would have been fine. But whether they put the bullets in their own heads or into another guest's body, the banquet company owner could be ready for a long vacation overseas. You make me want to get a Claymore mine with a timer. Seeing if they'll volunteer for a real heart-pounding experience seems like a good social experiment," Tony said. "Given the audacity of those playboys, I think this could be a perfect hangover cure. Even the most drunken person would sober up instantly. Don't give them too much credit, after all, some people are just as crazy even when they're not drunk." Henry's thoughtful look made Tony Stark uneasy. Just now, when a gun was pointed at his head, it wasn't anyone else who had rashly fought back. Looking back now, Tony couldn't quite place his impulsive actions. As if to deflect his embarrassment, he extended his hand and said, "Tony Stark." This was his first introduction. Henry was surprised. While it wasn't right to leave the future Iron Man's hand hanging in the air, he hesitated about associating with this troublemaker. Finally, Henry shook it, saying, "Henry. Henry Brown?" The handshake between the two men didn't have any touching feelings that moved people from heaven and earth, nor did it have any touch of destiny. It was just a touch, and that was all that mattered, mainly because Tony was not used to other people's body temperature. After half removing the holster skillfully, Tony confirmed the bullet in the bolt and said, "Let's deal with the killer in front first." "Well, shouldn't we find a phone to call the police first?" Henry asked. He also sighed in his heart. Why is Iron Man so reckless at this age? You haven't even put on a battle suit yet. But it's normal to think about it. Children who feel that they have never received fatherly love and are eager to show off their own children will do anything, even if it is a crime. However, Tony Stark didn't expect that he was being plotted in his mind by a Kryptonian who traveled through time. He took out a thing that looked like a transmitter from his pocket, with a flashing red light on it to attract people's attention. He said, "I have sounded the alarm, and within 20 minutes, people from the security company will be on the scene to clean up the mess. This is much faster than calling 911 and arguing with the old woman at the reporting center for a long time. Then we should concentrate on waiting for rescue. Don't you think the number difference between us and the enemy is too great? And there are too many people who will be taken hostage. Even if you don't care about the lives of those people and just shoot at them, how many bullets do you have?" Henry had just finished speaking when a group of people rushed into the front hall of the villa, which was originally empty except for the two of them hiding. As soon as they rushed in, they opened fire with rifles without saying a word. Although this barrage of gunfire did not penetrate the marble cabinet that served as a cover, it also caused all kinds of gravel and powder to spray all over the front hall. Tony and Henry both huddled up as much as possible to reduce the area of impact. Because if the marble cabinet was hit by concentrated fire, it would also be broken and penetrated. It only served to block the view. Tony Stark asked, "Are you going to sit and wait for death?" Poof. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.